the whole concept of inclusive practices, least restrictive environment, all of those things that we know are important, it applies to anyone, counselors who might pull out students, behavior consultants, autism consultants, special ed teachers, gen ed teachers, administrators. Everyone needs to know about how can we make inclusive practices work. And I think the group here, we have been in a situation for a long time where the common practice was pullout, right? For most people, not all of the time, but a lot of our services were pullout, except when you already were in a special ed setting. We got really, really good at push-in services into a functional skills classroom or a preschool setting or something like that. And it made sense, right? We were going in and providing services right there where a teacher could see what you're doing, you could model it, and then hopefully it would carry on throughout the day. But as far as most of our kids who are a little more typical, a little milder disabilities, the model has still been pull out for a long time. So that's what we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about maybe a little shift in goal writing. Still the same concepts, but just a slight tweak on what we do. So I want to go over quickly what's in our folders. So you have a copy of the PowerPoint, and also on the left you have our handy dandy trifold, which I have to give most of the credit to Matt Johnson on this. If you guys have done any training with Matt Johnson, he really did a lot of work on this. Then the rest of us pitched in and helped to tweak it, but Matt kind of poured his heart and soul into this. And if you already have one of these, feel free to take it back and share it with one of your colleagues just so that you have it. But the focus is really on those skill-based goals, not test-based goals, not things that we can't really put our finger on exactly what it means, but true skill-based goals. So we'll be covering some of that information, but this is for you to take back. On the right-hand side, you also have our standard paraphernalia, our brochures about what we do and who we do it with, but you also have some flyers for some of our upcoming opportunities that are a little bit new and different. So we've had this ongoing series called Conversations with Authors, and they're anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes long. They tend to be during the school day, but it is taking an author of a book that we're recommending is a good resource for people, and just having an online conversation with them about what the book's about, what are some of the key points, things like that. It's kind of the Cliff's Notes to a lot of these books. We do record all of these, so they're all available where you can go back and check them out on our website. If you ever think of, who wants to spend $40, $50 on a book unless you really know what it's about and what it entails. But again, it's during the day, but it's an easy way to hop on for a half an hour and just kind of break up your day a little bit. Good conversations. We also have, this one actually costs money because you get fed at this training. But June 8th and 9th, we have a 2-day on differentiation. And I myself cannot wait for this one because I know I recommend all the time, we need to differentiate, you need to do this. I tell people all the time, but if you ask me to truly give a solid explanation of how to differentiate, I'm not a teacher, so it's not really my strength. And I think, having some good information on this will be really helpful. This one's a freebie. So Beyond Treats and Timeouts is an online free webinar in the evening. It's not until September, and I believe there's going to be some ongoing PD opportunities like throughout the year that are kind of based on this series too, but the first one will be September 21st. So you can sign up for any of those. And then the last thing is our Learn and Lead cohort, and this is the third year that we'll be doing this cohort. And it is some in person and then some short online things throughout the year. There is, again, there's a slight cost to it just because at the face-to-face meetings, they do feed you. So, but these are all really good things too. If you want to check any of those out, there's more information that you can get on our website, and that's where you can also register. So before I jump into anything, is there anything specific that you all want to make sure that we have a conversation about or we cover sometime today? Other than what I mentioned.
How, I mean, this is the whole table of early childhood people. So, I mean, a lot of times we're like the front line of seeing children for the first time coming into schools. So, just suggestions on like the goals and stuff
Okay.
when we're just meeting a child that don't have a whole lot of information.
You've got whatever First Steps gave you and a little bit from the parent, and that's about it,
Well,
right?
And the evaluation's completed.
Right.
But, yeah, just to kind of keep that in mind that it can look very different than
Okay.
regular general ed.
Well, and then I have some goal examples, but maybe we can just construct some preschool examples kind of on the fly.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Anyone else? All right. We are recording today because my colleague Dale here needed something to do today. That's really the bottom line, but no bad mouthing your schools, no divulging secret information, but usually that never happens anyway. Other than we do have a lot of discussion at historically at this training about that's not the way my district does it, right? And I think that's just a fair and accurate truth for a lot of people. So I wouldn't be concerned about that. I'm not sure what we'll do with this training, but we may just have it, to be able to parcel out some pieces of it as well. All right, so just to start, this is such a common misconception. And I think I hear this more from administrators than anyone else. When I ask about inclusive practices, oh, well, we have an inclusion room. It's like we have the one room that's an inclusion room, and then we have the other third grade rooms that are what? Exclusion rooms, right? That kids with special needs, special rights are not in. I mean, it's kind of that mindset of this is not a place, right? This is not an action. It's more of a culture, a mindset, just a way that we operate. And it's a feeling. When you go into a building that has very strong inclusive practices, you feel it because you see the kids interacting differently. You see the teachers using different language. There's less of the my kid, your kid, and it's more about our students. So it's definitely a little bit different feel. Okay, so we're going to start this morning with digging into least restrictive environment. And exactly what does that mean? And how does what you all do play into that LRE code for the student, and really into their rights, right? Then we'll talk a little bit more about mindset in general and how much that really can affect things. And it's not just, mindset of the school, mindset of me as a provider. It's also the mindset of we've always done it a certain way. And sometimes it's the mindset of the parent, right? Sometimes parents believe that if we provide services in the gen ed classroom, my kid's not getting what they should be getting, and I'm getting shortchanged somehow, right? I think that conversation happens within parent groups sometimes of, oh, don't let them talk you into this, because what they're just trying to get out of supporting your child, and that's not the case. Sometimes you work a lot harder to do it in an inclusive manner, and And the kid can benefit so much more from that exposure. We'll talk about goal writing. I'm not sure exactly when the break will be as far as when we hit lunchtime. We will break at 11:30 because my body says 11:30 is eating time, and so we'll go from 11:30 to 12:30 and then come back. We'll jump into co-teaching models. And I know that most of you in here are not teachers in the sense of instructing, but we're going to talk about how what you do can fit into a co-teaching model, not necessarily by you going in and teaching algebra, right? But seeing how your skill set and your domain area would fit into what's going on in the classroom. Because so many other kids can benefit from what you do than just the kids on your caseload. And doing that in a gen ed setting helps with that as well. And then a little bit about communication. How do we make this happen? How do we share this out? What are our first steps? If we're going to make some changes, what does it look like? And then we'll wrap up for the day. My guess is we will end a little early. I know that breaks your heart, but yeah, it's probably not going to take all the way up until 3 o'clock today. Okay, so starting with LRE. I know most of you have students that you are writing the entire IEP, right? You've got your kids that you are the TOR, and you are writing everything. And so you know what LRE is. You know how the system works as far as calculating the minutes and all that kind of good stuff. So that's not really what this is about. It's more about definition-wise, what does it tell us in Article 7? I sometimes have fallen asleep in bed with a copy of Article 7, rereading pieces and parts to make sure that I'm getting a good handle on this, because the wording is really important. So it tells us that we're supposed to include students with disabilities in with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. Now that's important. It's not to the maximum extent. This is not saying every kid needs to be in gen ed 100% of the time and everything we do needs to be in with other kids. It's saying on a case-by-case basis, as much as we can get them with their non-disabled peers where we're not pulling them out separately, that's what we're supposed to be doing. It goes on to say that any of this other stuff we do, whether it's pulling them out, you know, for speech or OT or anything like that, all the way to, you know, a completely separate school, a residential setting, any of that kind of stuff. We only do that if the nature and severity of the disability means that we can't make it happen in gen ed. Even if we are putting in supplementary aids and services, we're doing all the things that we know how to do. Using assistive technology, possibly using a paraprofessional, using a co-teacher, using, you know, visuals, any of the stuff. We know how to do so many different things. And we have to attempt those first before thinking about, okay, we can't make it happen. It just can't happen in gen ed. And so then we move to that next step along that continuum of least restrictive environment. I think we skip this a lot, and I am terribly guilty of this as well. I can't tell you, I'm a psychologist by background, and I can't tell you how many kids that we had our first case conference, right? This maybe a second grader testing for the first time. We get that LD qualification, and we come to that very first meeting, and the special ed teacher says, okay, reading is really a problem for this student. I want to pull them out for reading an hour a day and work on this. And my mind goes to, yeah, that makes sense, right? This kid needs more reading support. We need to do this. We haven't even tried anything to make it happen in that gen ed setting first. I mean, I've done that over and over and over again over the years without pushing harder for more inclusive services. Part of it has to do with, and this is reality, that we only have so many teachers, so many therapists, so many paraprofessionals, and we've got a schedule, right? I've been in lots of elementary schools where you've got, maybe 2 grades or 2 classrooms per grade, kindergarten through 5th or 6th grade, and you have 1 or 2 special ed teachers, 1 speech pathologist if you're lucky, if they're not being shared with another building or 2 other buildings, and you're probably sharing an OT among several buildings, right? That they're hopping from place to place. And so you're working within the confines of a limited amount of resources. Now, what the law says is we don't care about that. You have to do what's right for the child, and then the district has to figure out how to make that happen. But we also know if you do that too many times, you're probably going to get fired, right? If you're saying, oh, absolutely, we'll make this happen, and if we have to hire an extra person, we're going to hire an extra person. Well, we don't really have the capability to say that. So it's finding that balance between what else could we do? How could we make this happen? How can we start changing that mindset and culture so that we are truly serving students in that least restrictive environment. This doesn't include quite everything, but this is the general range of what least restrictive environment looks like. Here's another kind of thing that doesn't always make sense at first glance. We know that receiving services or supports in the general education setting for the majority of your day, so when you look at the minutes, it's talking about at least 80% of your time is spent in with your non-disabled peers. In the gen ed classroom would be the least of the least restrictive environments. All the way to, you may get a little bit of service, a little bit of pull out here and there, all the way to a day program or a separate school. And then on the far end, we've got a residential placement, and then we also have homebound or hospital. This is considered the most, absolutely most restrictive placement. Now, in my mind, I would think, well, going off to a residential setting feels more restrictive. But when you're in a residential setting, you're at least in with other kids. So when you're talking about homebound, which we do frequently for students who are in trouble, right? Students who are up for expulsion, students whose behavior has kind of crossed over that limit to where we're like, they need to go home for a while, right? Those kids are isolated. They are alone. They're not getting exposure to their gen ed peers, but they're also not getting exposure to very many staff members, their disabled peers. They are in a very isolated setting. So many schools across the state of Indiana that are out of compliance for Indicator 5, which is least restrictive environment, a lot of them are out of compliance because they have too many kids that have been placed in a homebound setting. I see lots of kindergartners who the principal has said, yeah, we can't have them here at school. We're going to have to put them on homebound. And are they going to get any better behavior-wise if they're on homebound? Probably not, because you don't have any models for that, and you're not getting to practice and experience those things. If you've got a kid who's biting other kids in the classroom, it's a problem, but sending them home isn't going to do anything for that problem. So you're kind of in an interesting situation I know a lot of you have kids who maybe speech or language is their only disability, but yet they've still gotten in some serious trouble for something, or brought drugs to school, or there are things that happen that may cause them to be up for removal from school, and then you're on homebound. So does this kind of make sense in a very nonsense kind of way? Mm-hmm. So thinking about inclusion in general, The notion of inclusion has really changed a lot over the years. So a million years ago, when my mother was in school, let's go there first, right? When my mother was in school, most of the kids with disabilities, because those milder disabilities weren't really even identified then, right? Somebody with a learning disability many times didn't get identified. Somebody who had a severe cognitive disability, absolutely. You knew who those kids were. Kids with serious orthopedic impairments or something like that. Those kids didn't show up in your school when she was young. You often didn't know who they were. They stayed at home, or they were off in a residential kind of facility or a hospital or something like that. Now, by the time I got in school, which was also a million years ago, but we had the special ed room at the end of the hall that none of us ever got to go in, right? Like, I didn't even know what it looked like inside that room. This was Miss Blackburn's room, and Miss Blackburn was an amazing woman and amazing teacher. But the kids who went to her room, we didn't eat lunch with, we didn't play with. They were our neighborhood kids, but they didn't come into our class. So they were in school, but they were in their own little bubble here. Now, when things got more inclusive, we started seeing kids come into our classroom. I remember we had a kid, he was a very bright kid, but he was in a wheelchair, and he started coming into our classroom in like 6th grade. I'm like, we would fight over who got to push the wheelchair, and everybody wanted to be his friend. It was great. But when it came time for instruction, and I don't think this kid had any cognitive issues whatsoever, but somehow when it came time for instruction, he was still back at the little table. I've been in classrooms where classrooms wanted to show off their inclusive practices. And I've walked in and seen a special ed teacher say, all my kids, come back here, come back to the kidney table, right? And they all go back in the corner. Not so inclusive when you get called out for your disability and when you're still excluded within that gen ed classroom. That to me is really not inclusion. It is a cluster within a classroom. Then we started mixing it up a little bit, which is good, right? The more co-teaching that we were doing, like true co-teaching, not just push-in services, not just using the space in the back corner, but mixing things up, realizing that we can capitalize on the strengths and the conversation that happens among the students who are in the classroom to help pull other kids along. And I don't know how many of you are parents, but when my daughter was younger and I felt like I was explaining a concept clear as can be, right? I would explain something in math and she would look at me like I had two heads, and I could hear another child her age explain it with almost my exact same words and see the light bulb go off in her. Yeah, oh, yeah, I get it. There's something about kid speak that just gets through to other kids. And it's really important that all of our students have the opportunity to experience the gen ed curriculum within the context of other kids, right? Within the context of hearing the conversation. Teaching the same thing is not the same as getting to experience what happened during the teaching and all the things that were shared. So moving from this still assumes that we see green, which is what? What are our green dots? Normal, right? We think of these are non-disabled, normal kids. And then our kids still stick out. And it's the movement now is really to move to where we recognize those individual strengths, differences, challenges, uniquenesses, everything about all students. I would say it'd be really nice to have a world without labels, but I don't think that's really possible because labels help us to figure out what to do, how to support. There's something to be said for knowing that certain students have certain needs that we need to address. But conceptually, thinking that, okay, not all of our green kids are the same shade of green, right? We really have to think beyond that. So thinking about this, when we're thinking about speech, OT, any other pull-out kinds of services or push-in services, or any other way that you've done this, if you look at the different options, where have your services typically been? How many A's? I'm hoping no A's. Okay. What about B's? Okay. C's? Some. And D's? A lot of pull-out groups. And there's a time and a place for all of these things, right? So again, even when we're talking about the LRE continuum, I also wanted to emphasize that I would not suggest that everything that you guys do needs to always be in a gen ed setting. It can't, right? For some of you who are speech pathologists, where you're spending part of your group time blowing bubbles, right? You can't really do that in the gen ed classroom without it distracting everything that's going on, unless everyone is working on bubble blowing that day. Then that's fine. But there are a lot of things where you're doing things that almost could be a little bit of an embarrassment to a student if they're having to practice making certain movements and motions and, put your tongue here and do this and that. There are a lot of things that may not be appropriate in the beginning, at least, for that student. So definitely want to just look at the opportunities that we have for getting more inclusive. Not overnight, we're going to do everything in a gen ed kind of setting. Okay, any of you worked in the outside world, the outside of education? Very different, right? So what's different about it? Okay, well, give me some examples.
Writing goals to appease insurance.
Now, for those of you who bill Medicaid, do you still experience that in an education setting or not as much? How many of you are Medicaid billing? Okay, do you feel like you have to write things a certain way? Okay, well, that's good. What else is different? What do we tell our parents all the time?
I was just going to say, in the school setting, looking for that educational impact.
Absolutely. And educational impact, remember, it means academic and or functional. So you could have a kid who is rocking the iLearn test or iRead or anything else and making really good grades, but because of their disability, it could have serious functional impact and they can still qualify. So sometimes that gets a little twisted out there in the schools of, oh, we can't even test this kid because they're making straight A's. Well, that has nothing to do with it. That's one piece. If it is seriously impacting their functional performance, we think of your kid who has a very, very strong articulation disorder. We've got some kids that we can see that impacts maybe their reading or decoding, right? The kid who misreads something because their sound production leads them to miss the word, right? You have other kids, though, who are doing fine academically, but they are really struggling with interacting with their peers because their peers cannot understand them. And so, you've got the little boy who wants to play with somebody on the playground, and that kid finally gives up and walks away because I don't get what you're asking me. That is seriously affecting them, even if their academic performance was just fine. So we always have to think about that. OTs, what's the big difference for you guys as a related service? Uh-huh.
You can't stand alone, so you have to have like either speech or special ed service in order to qualify for it.
Right. And your related service has to be needed in order to benefit from your special ed service. Now, that's different than in the outside world where my insurance company may say, okay, based on your results of an assessment, then you qualify for this many sessions of occupational therapy. Well, number one, you have to have a primary disability in the educational setting, and we have to be able to justify that this kid needs OT or PT or counseling or whatever the related service is in order to benefit from their special ed services. It's a hard sell to parents who say, but wait, I have an occupational therapist outside of school. Why would I not qualify in school? Well, that's why. A lot of kids do, but there are some kids that don't. Or the kid who clearly has some occupational therapy needs but doesn't have another disability. So we can't qualify just on the basis of that related service.
We get a lot of questions on the initial referral and qualification about feeding, and because we're in early childhood, but
Uh-huh.
as it relates to OT or speech and addressing feeding in the school setting. So that's always a.
So what do you do? What's your response?
Well, I'm not the occupational therapist. Typically, we talk about the medical model versus educational model. And a lot of times, occupational therapy is included in classroom roles because that's how we're addressing the special ed area.
Mm-hmm.
So we incorporate, some sensory input things, but we don't directly address feeding in the classroom setting.
Now, if you've got a kid who is choking every day as they're with swallowing and they need some occupational therapy and potentially some speech therapy to help with some of those different things going on, because you're at risk for not benefiting from your special ed service if you choke every day, right? That's definitely something that's getting in your way, then that could be pretty easily justified. But there are a lot of preschool's very different. In preschool, you guys have the opportunity to do a lot of super inclusive things, but inclusive in typically an exclusive environment, meaning you in many situations you have all students with disabilities in that classroom, but all services are generally given within that classroom as well. So definitely some differences there. Okay, so we've got a medical model versus an educational model as far as how you get in the door, how you get those services, but then we also want to think about how we write goals then. Sometimes we get very used to writing goals based on our tests that we typically give. We give a particular test, it gives us a certain outcome, and so we pick some items from the test basically and almost center our goals around them. And we need to think bigger. We need to think about life-changing skills for the student regardless of the test. The test gives us one thing, but now what skill do we actually want to increase for the student? Okay, so when we look at those differences, one of the differences has to do with how you get in the door in the first place. We use some of the same evaluation techniques and we use some that are different because we know that there are certain things that are required by Article 7 that have to be done. Meaning for every disability area, we have to do academic assessment. If you were in a private setting, evaluating for speech, evaluating for language, evaluating for motor, you're probably not going to do any sort of academic assessment. And I would guess that most of you don't do academic assessment, but you are gathering some academic information from existing data because it's a requirement and the system forces you to look at that. Make sure if you are writing any, for speech, if you're writing any standalone reports where it was not part of another evaluation as well, that you are including a section that looks at academic achievement. Again, nobody's expecting you to go out and give a Woodcock Johnson or a KTEA or something like that. Some schools, I think, have taken to given something really short and sweet, you know, a screener kind of measure, or for our younger kids, like a Bracken basic concepts or something like that. For preschool, you probably have some information that's coming from some of your other screening information, or even some of your adaptive behavior information may pull in some academic kinds of things. But there's not a whole lot expected at the preschool level as far as academics. We don't expect a 3-year-old to know all their colors, all their shapes, all their letters. That comes later. But yeah, we write a whole lot of goals about those in preschool when a lot of typical kids don't have that skill yet. So that'll be down the road here. But you've got to have something, right? So if you're not going to do some sort of a test, you need to at least gather information from the teacher that says, how are they doing in reading? How are they doing in math? How are they doing in writing? Is there anything that I should be concerned about in their, being able to orally answer things if it's speech, or being able to write if it's OT? Think about the things that are connected academically. Eligibility, we know, is different too, because we have to take all those pieces and parts, including, whatever observations we've done or anything like that. We're pulling that all together to determine eligibility either for speech, language, or a related service. And then the goals are definitely different. When you're writing goals for a private client, they look very different. We're progress monitoring in a different way. We're satisfying different requirements. You don't have to make a diagnosis of any kind in order to serve a student in the school setting. Anything anybody else wants to add to this? I feel a little out of the loop because as a psychologist, my background is very different. And just so you guys know, we originally started this training with a speech pathologist and I working together on this, and then she left us. So it kind of falls to me, but I know you guys are the experts in what you do. So anytime that you want to add your wisdom to things, please jump in. All right, so present levels of performance are incredibly important. The whole IEP process is laid out in a way that starts here and ends up with services. We cannot know what goals to write unless we have a good understanding of present levels, where a student's starting from. And until we write a goal and think about how far do we have to take this kid in a year's time, what skill we're going to be working on, we can't determine services. Services have to be based on, I'm starting here, I want to end here, what's it going to take? What's the dosage of your service that it's going to take? Likely, we're always making our best guess, right? It's not exactly a super science. But we have to have good present levels. And I could pull 10 IEPs from across the state of, the same disability, same grade level, same gender. They're going to look so different in how we write present levels. Some schools actually give you like a template or a framework that says, in every time that you write present levels, you must include these headers and you must fill in some information. Others have not. And sometimes you see a difference between a student who has a different primary disability versus having speech or language as a primary disability about what's included. But it really shouldn't be much different, because we're expected to look at present levels of academic and functional performance, meaning we need to hit all those areas every time, no matter what your disability is. It's just, I know that for some kids with certain disabilities, I'm probably going to have a lot more to write about in certain sections, right? Speech paths, you're going to have a lot more to write about in that communication and social section, than most people would. If you're if the student is qualifying for OT or we're considering that, you're going to have a lot more to write on motor, and many of our kids, you're going to have no motor problems written in a motor section, right? So check within your district and see, is there something that other people are using that seems to make sure that you cover everything so that you don't have somebody come back later and say, well, you didn't even mention this, you didn't talk about this. How do I know it was okay if you didn't mention that area? So the biggest thing about present levels is that word present, meaning they need to be current. They can't be from last year. They can't be from, if you're doing a revised IEP and it was from an IEP that you did 6 months ago, you need to update those present levels to make sure that they are present. They also need to be relevant. I mean, I don't need a full rundown of, every change that's happened in this kiddo's household if it's not relevant to their articulation disorder, Sometimes I feel like we've got the Jerry Springer show written in our present levels because we know too much. And if it's not relevant to what we're doing with the student, then it probably could be left out of the IEP. Make sure we cover the academic and functional piece. And then Article 7 also says that we need to have some kind of statement about how the student's disability or suspected disability, because sometimes we're not there yet, how it affects their access to and their progress in the general curriculum. It's kind of a statement that, okay, but what exactly does that mean, right? So we have to pick that apart a little bit. And I've seen some good examples from schools who have their blanket statement that they write, and then you have to fill in some of the details because every kid is going to be different. So you might say that, Johnny's communication skills interfere with his ability to orally respond to questions or assignments or things like that. Or you may have a student that, has other health impairment for their diabetes, and you may say that the student fatigues easily and sometimes has to leave class to rest or to deal with medical issues and sometimes misses some of the curriculum. So how is it that this kid's disability is keeping them from soaking up all the stuff that we've got going at school that's ready and waiting for them to learn? And that's kind of hard to think about sometimes. Is it that my sensory issues are so extreme that I need frequent breaks and therefore I'm sometimes missing instruction? Or that I have serious motor problems and I sometimes can't respond quickly enough to things in writing? That doesn't tell us what we're going to do yet, right? When we get down the road to thinking about services and supports, we may be talking about assistive technology or certain accommodations or things like that. It's just saying this is what the problem is and this is how it gets in my way. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
How specific do you make that?
I would say the more specific, the better, but I also see it left out a lot,
Are you
And-
adding that under the access in curriculum, or?
kind of your final statement. This all has to do with that present level section.
Right.
So somewhere at the end of your present levels, it's kind of like, okay, here's how the kid's doing and all these different things. And now that last statement to me is, how is this getting in my way? All this other stuff that we talked about.
Isn't it the strengths and weaknesses, and then it's like the last section on existing data, I think.
Yeah. So you've got strengths, parent concerns, I think, and progress monitoring, or
Or
I forget what the
present levels,
yeah.
That's where we put present levels.
Yep.
If it's an initial, or it's ACO, that's right.
But it's important to talk about this because that has a lot to do with eligibility too, right? If I say this kid is not having any problems, then, you know, at the end of my present levels, I'm saying this doesn't interfere in any way with this student's performance or, you know, any of their functional skills, then you're kind of to the point of not being eligible if you don't need anything support-wise, or if you only need accommodations. Okay, so here, I know it's small, but you should be able to see it a little bit better on your own slides. What we don't want to see is, in reading, he has an 82. In math, he has this, right? Now, for some of you who are writing speech or language only, you're probably going to shrink this way down if you're not having very specific things, right? But you still have to have some description of how the student is doing in the basics, reading, writing, and math. I don't necessarily need to know, for most students, that they're making, you know, here's how they're doing in art. But if my behavior in art is a problem, if my motor skills in art are a problem, because you see a lot of that, you see a lot of sensory reactions in an art room of, I don't want to touch that, you know, there are certain things that you know you're going to see your students having some difficulty with. But otherwise, when you're talking about academics, reading, writing, and math in general, because reading, writing, and math isn't a class necessarily, it's a skill. So I don't necessarily need to know your English language arts grade. You can put that in there. It's not going to kill anything if you do, but we know grades are so subjective from school to school. But you're going to use math in a number of classes. You're going to use reading in just about every class. You're going to have to do some writing in many different classes. So just thinking about the skill set. And then functional. So we've got just some general stuff here. Daily living skills. Those things are important. Communication skills. You may have some motor things. You may have, depending on the age and depending on the functioning level of the student, you may have some information about self-help skills, right? Can the student button their own clothing? If that's not an issue, you're not going to be writing about it, right? You're not going to take a 10th grader with average intellectual ability and write that he can zip his own pants and blow his own nose, right? You might say that functional skills are appropriate, or you're going to be thinking about the functional skills that maybe the student is struggling with that are related to that age. Organizational skills. Maybe even for a 10th or 11th grader, whether they have the dexterity to even think about driving. Those are things that are important at that age. But details about what can I not do? What can I sort of do but not real consistently and probably need some additional support? And what are some things that I already can do? We've got to figure out exactly where you are. And if you talk about, okay, well, I can't dunk a basketball on a 12-foot hoop, right? That doesn't tell you what I can do and where I am. Like, how high can I jump, That's why we get that sense of, here's where you can't, and here's where you can, and here's the in-between of, here's what we're starting to do. That helps you write your goals. I'm seeing some confused looks, so. Tell me what questions you have. Are you getting specifics in your own present levels now? Or how does this compare? Or let me ask you this. Are you sticking to your own area and not really branching out beyond that for present levels? Like, for those of you who write just speech or language IEPs, are you only talking about communication? Well, and with preschool, it's kind of natural I think, to do that. But I think for some people, when you've just got an SI or LI student that you are writing an IEP like at 5th grade or something like that, the tendency is I'm just going to write about communication and nothing else. So just make sure that you branch this out, because that's why it is what do they do it? PLAAFP, the PLAF, the present levels of academic and functional performance. So you got to hit the academics and the functional piece. It's also a good justification to be able to say, I'm pretty sure that my identified areas of eligibility are correct and we shouldn't be looking at something else. Because I think for SLPs, a lot of times you have somebody coming along later saying, yeah, but I'm thinking LD, I'm thinking OHI, I'm thinking the student might have an emotional disability. And having that documentation in your IEPs along the way to say, this has been fine, or this has been a problem that's been building and we might need to look there. That provides more data to be able to either refuse something or go with it. And I think you use those terms. Can do this in isolation, cannot generalize this to a group setting or to the classroom or with unfamiliar adults, or whatever it is that you're talking about. I think that's an important piece, because there are a lot of things that we can do in isolation, but I can't do in front of other people. Or there a lot of our kids who have specific disabilities, it's a confusing mess. It's not just that I have this pure articulation problem. It's coupled with some social anxiety because of having that, right? So there are other factors that always feed into what we can do and what we can't do. There are kids who could behave beautifully, right? And regulate so well in a nice, dimly lit, quiet environment, but you put them in a classroom with fluorescent lights and other sounds and kids constantly moving, and suddenly that skill is not there anymore. So, sometimes what we see in the isolation of a nice, calm testing room, because we always want to get their best when we're testing a student, is not really the real picture. And we get that pushback from our teachers, too, that say, are you sure you pulled the right kid? Right? We hear that a lot of, I'm not sure if you actually have the right protocol in front of you. Like, no, really, they were able to do this, but they weren't able to do it in a different kind of setting. So, okay, so this really, I think this is part of your, if you look in here, when they talk about the components of what should a measurable goal look like what does it have to entail? Number one, we've got to start with a skill. Let's see if I have other slides on this before I go jumping. Yeah, we're going to look at this. We're going to move from a skill, and then we also know that we're not always going to have that skill in every single condition or setting, or what's it going to take to draw out that skill. So we're going to talk about the stimulus material that's needed, or the condition that we expect to see it, because sometimes we are writing goals that specifically all we want to do in the next year is get this kid to be able to do this in isolation, right? And then later we're talking about in whole words, or at the beginning, or at the end, or in different unfamiliar settings. We have like lots of different conditions that we might put on that. Then we have to make it measurable by adding that piece that is an acceptable level of where are you performing at, okay? So starting with the skill, it needs to be a skill that we care about. I've seen lots of IEP goals that I'm like, okay, if this kid reaches that goal in the next year, who cares, right? You see a lot of IEP goals that are like, okay, we wrote this goal, and yes, it's beautiful, it's measurable, but if I reach that goal, my life hasn't really changed. I'm probably going to reach that goal anyway, regardless of whether you did anything. Or we have a lot of IEP goals that are written because somehow we got the notion at one point that we need to base IEP goals on grade level standards. We do have to pay attention to grade level standards to know what is typically taught and expected so that we can think about how is this kid's skill set likely going to interfere with that, and so what do we need to work on there. But we are not writing a goal that is the standard because every other fourth grader is working on that. It has to be something unique to a student with a disability, a skill that everybody else is probably going to do fine with, and this kid's going to struggle for this reason. And the reason, that skill, is what we're writing the goal on. So think life changer goals. And I don't mean by that you need to make this, this kid will be able to fluently say every sound that there is by next year. I don't mean like setting the bar so high that the kid can't reach the goal. I'm just saying think about what is the most important skill for this kid to focus on for the next year. And I present that a lot of times to parents in IEP meetings when we start talking about, well, we need a goal for this and a goal for this and a goal for this, and we need to have like 15 different reading goals. Like, we're going to work on tons of stuff. And you all know you are not just working on the skills that are on a student's IEP, but you only write goals for the things that you want to pay the most attention to and you want to progress monitor because those are the key skills that are going to be life changers. Okay, so it should make your goals a little shorter for some people. So if you think about words that help us really focus on skills that we can see or hear, there are some words that we have gotten used to using that you can't really see, or it's hard to know if you've seen them, right? The kid will identify a word or will identify a picture when presented with a word from a choice of 4 pictures, whatever. Well, how do I know if they identified it? Do you get like a little flash, in their eyes so you know, oh, I've identified it? Or recognize, that's another word that, I don't know whether you recognized it or not. But if you say something like, we'll point to, or we'll verbalize something that you could see it or you could hear that it actually happened so that you can know to record, yes, they did, or know that they didn't. Those are the words that you want to use. So demonstrate, extend, increase, identify, learn. That's another. Student will learn blah, blah, blah. I have no way of knowing did they learn it or not because I'm not sure exactly how you see that with a student. Recognize, understand, show, cooperate. And it's not that those are terrible, they're just not as good as something that is very concrete. Always remember that your IEPs could disappear tomorrow and go to somebody else. And so you have to make sure that even though you might have been clear on something, that it is going to pass the stranger test. And if somebody else gets a copy of that IEP, they're going to be able to say, okay, I know exactly how to measure this. I know exactly what you meant by this. And it will just be clear. IEPs are not easy to write. They seem like they should be very methodically, you go through the motions. They are not easy. I've seen so many people struggle with just, I don't know the word I want to use. I'm not really sure what skill I want to use. And again, if we go back to present levels, the clearer your present levels are on what's happening with the student and what they already can do and what that next skill is that they can't do that's important, that is what's going to help drive the goal. The next piece is that stimulus material or condition. So for the goal, Not necessarily for life in general, because in general, we want everyone to get the skill, to be able to show it, to be able to use it in different situations, to apply it to novel things that come along. You know, of course that's what we want. But we're writing a goal for 1 year. So by next year, what do I want to see? We want to think about this piece because you are not necessarily going to be, you know, with your clipboard, like following this kid around 24/7 under every possible condition to collect data on what they can do. So we kind of narrow this down a little bit to say, okay, when certain things are happening or when certain conditions are put in place, then I want to be able to see it then. It gives you a better idea of when to assess it, but it also gives you a more narrow focus so that you can say, yes, it'd be great if they could do it in lots of other situations too, but where do I want to see this? So give me some examples of what you guys put in goals related to conditions or materials.
During a 20-minute one-on-one speech session,
Okay?
or during a 20-minute small group task
Okay?
in the classroom.
Good.
Or
What else?
During circle time or during small group activity.
Good. So sometimes it's setting, right? We're talking about the place or the setup for where we would like to see this. What about skills that you could apply in multiple ways? I've seen a lot of like speech goals that say beginning and ending sounds, but not necessarily in the middle yet, right? Or sounds in isolation versus a sound within a consonant blend or something like that, because I don't think they're going to be to that next stage by that next year. Again, I'm not the expert in this, so that's why I want to hear from you guys as far as some examples.
Well, we've been doing like speech articulation, like we'll do it in 1 or 2 syllable words. Like,
Okay,
for the ones
how
that
many
are-
syllables are, yes. Because if you ask me to correctly say something that's 2 syllables, that's a very different skill of being able to keep that skill applied to a super long word, right? It makes it harder. What about other like support materials that you might think of? Such as when provided with visuals, right? Sometimes that gets into your goal. When given a choice of 4 choices, sometimes that's what you're looking at. That's very different. I can measure whether somebody was able to use a skill when given 4 choices versus just open-ended. Like you get a lot of kids that we want them to use their coping skills, right? We teach them coping skills. We want them to be able to regulate their emotions, their behavior. But if I just say, Johnny, use your coping skills, it's like, I don't even remember what they are, right? Measuring that versus I've taught 4 coping skills and we've worked on these all year, and I want to, when given a menu of 4 coping skill choices, he is able to point to his choice and implement it. That's different, right? And it's easier to measure when you've got that setup piece in there.
This is also talking about like prompting level too.
Sure.
Prompting level.
Absolutely, absolutely. When given no more than 2 verbal prompts, or no more than, or 1 visual prompt and 1 verbal prompt, that's different than just he's going to do it, right? Yeah, absolutely. And you're going to have some kids that you need to be very specific about these things, and some kids that it's a little bit lower. You're not providing quite as many qualifiers because they're at a different level, right? You've got kids along a full spectrum of high needs to lower needs of the kind of skills that you're working on.
Do you see a difference between condition and like setting? So we often say when given setting, they will perform this skill or whatever. So do you see it being reversed? Like we should say the condition and not the setting?
No, not necessarily. I think you can have some kids that the setting is what you're focused on, and some kids that it's more that stimulus material that you're looking on.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So in my school district, we've been talking a lot about writing goals.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about specifically designed instruction, which is
Mhm.
the piece before the goal in the IIEP. And that's when we are writing like visual cues, verbal prompts, tactile cues, whatever on the speech map.
Mhm.
And we were told those then don't have to be put in the goal. And I've always put in like given verbal cues or whatever, but they were saying if you've got it in the specifically designed instruction, you don't have to put it in the goal. And I haven't let go of it yet because
No, I get that, because there's no reason to keep duplicating
Right.
things, right? But the specially designed instruction piece, I would kind of argue that maybe those things are more general accommodations and supports. It's not that it's bad to have them
Right.
in there, but how am I going to teach you differently?
right.
And so your specially designed instruction may be instruction on how to use visuals, or it may be that you need to have pre-taught vocabulary, or that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't redo stuff, but you also may have like 4 or 5 things written in specially designed instruction, but you want to narrow that goal down to when do I want to see it, or under what condition do I want to see it. And so it may draw in one of those
Yeah.
things, but not all of them. Definitely
Right,
not
right,
all
right.
of them.
Could you in that scenario just put like given one cue and then the cues are listed in the specially designed?
You could, yeah.
Like, because you might use a variety of cues. I'm thinking like, one might work one day, but another one might work another day.
Now keep in mind that when you're writing things in your specially designed instruction, you don't want to get to the point of methodology. So if you get too specific, then the expectation from a parent is going to be, this is what we use. So, we never list programs, we never list, particular methodology in that way. And even then, because just like you said, some things work one way, some things work another. So the kind of prompting that I use, maybe like even the verbiage that I use might be very different. So I'm not going to want to say, well, first prompt is to say this, or get real specific on that kind of stuff. I feel like sometimes when we write an IEP that we feel like is like an operating manual, it almost locks us in to trouble, because we're putting in there what we think is best. But again, if it's not portable, if it's not going to necessarily apply if they go to a different building or a different therapist or any of that kind of stuff, then that can be problematic. Oh, I did have another slide on this. So we've got some things here. Communication boards. That's another thing too for a lot of our students is, if they have a device, then we may be asking for them to communicate something but not be talking about verbally. So we want to make sure that we're very clear on what we're talking about. So when using a communication device, we're not going to say when using a communication board that has this many options or these specific pictures, because that may change over time too. Okay, and then the last piece of goals is just how are we going to know? How are we going to know if we are to the point where we say we made it, right? We crossed the finish line consistently enough, right? Because that's another thing too. We want to make sure that we've got something to identify whether something has been achieved, so it has to be measurable in that sense, but we also want to feel confident that we achieved it and it's going to stick, or it's likely to stick. So we've got a lot of different ways that we can write goals. We've got a lot of different ways that you all write your goals. So we may have something specific. There's no right or wrong here, right? It may have to do with the particular skill that you're working on, whether we're talking about an accuracy level, how many, what percentage, whatever you're looking at, a rate, a fluency, how fast can you do something, the duration or the latency. So for some of our kids, we're writing goals about how long it takes, or in a lot of cases, how short it takes is what we're going for them to respond to something. We want them to respond quicker. We want them to do something more immediately. Or we want them to stick with something longer than they're sticking with. Okay, so lots of different ways that you could write this. I also like, it gets really confusing to me when I read a goal that will be at 80% accuracy, 4 out of 5 times, or 4 out of 5 trials, and it's like layer upon layer, that when my mind starts to interpret, well, what does that really mean? It sometimes gets confusing. My preference in a lot of cases, but not all, I guess, is having like so many sequential times that you hit a certain bar. So you guys know when you're giving tests and you've got your basals and your ceilings, right? And the kid who gets 1 right, then misses 3, and then gets 1 right, and then misses 3. Like, is that not maddening when that happens? You're like, come on, just miss 1 more. I need to be done with this subtest and move on. I think sometimes when we get kids who have fleeting levels of high performance, we're not sure, have they truly mastered this goal yet or not? And to me, when you can do something consistently over so many consecutive trials, that is a better indication in a lot of cases that, okay, I may still bomb one after that, because we all do in our daily skill set of things. But if I can do that on a more consistent basis, I would have a little bit more stock in that, I guess.
So how would you word that? Because to me, in my mindset, that's like 80% out of 4 out of 5 opportunities.
It is, but I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with the 80% on 4 out of 5. To me, it is confusing to parents
Okay.
who
Isn't
think,
it the same thing? I mean, 4 out of 5 trials is 80%.
well, no, but if say I got, let's see, a 90, a 20, a 90. I've hit 4 out of 5 trials that I hit 80%, but I'm not necessarily at 80%.
Right, but I wonder, like, 80% accuracy or 4 out of 5 trials, I guess I feel like are the same, but then if you say over 3 consecutive sessions or 5 consecutive.
Right.
But I guess the 80 and 4 out of 5 to me is like 80-80.
Yeah.
It's really,
Oh, see, I took the 4 out of 5 as in like 4 out of 5 sessions.
yeah, see,
They reached that
okay.
benchmark.
So I do 4 out of 5 trials, so if I
I do
present.
4 out of 5 trials.
Yeah, so if I present, like if the goal is to, I don't know, label 5, I don't know. My 4 out of 5 is that many times in one session. So again, if we write them clearer, like if we write in it so many session word, but yeah, they can be super confusing.
Yeah.
Wordy.
They definitely are, because we all do it different, Okay, so let's see. Gail will correctly articulate all phonemes in spontaneous conversation with 90% accuracy and no cueing. What do you think about this goal? Do we have a skill first?
It's too broad.
Well, I would agree. Like, if we're at this point, she's about ready to exit, don't you think?
We're around 24/7
Yes.
if it's not written
You
specifically
couldn't
what
measure
session.
all the phonemes at once.
Okay, what else? 90% accuracy and no cueing. Is that measurable?
Yeah. 90% accuracy is measurable.
Okay, but does she
Maybe
meet
not
the
for all.
goal if she did it once? I observed one day and I observed some spontaneous conversation. It was beautiful and she was at 95%. Did she meet the goal and we're ready to move on?
That day.
That day, right. So tomorrow it could be totally different. She could be in a little different conversation and choosing different words, and boy, she does not have it. So that's where I think, when you get that, at first glance, this goal doesn't look terrible, but it's problematic. Like, if you got this goal in an IEP that came to you, you would probably say, okay, slow down. What are we really going to focus on? What is the most important thing? I get that we're talking about spontaneous conversation. We're not talking about within isolated words or phrases or something like that. But we've got some conditions, no cueing, right? It's not with me telling you to correct something. But we have just, is it the one time? It gets muddy, right? Poor Gail. Gail's having a lot of problems. In a small group setting, Gail will say developmentally appropriate speech sounds, so initial K, G, F, and V. I did not write this goal, by the way. When creating a sentence, given a word or a picture with no cueing, 9 of 10 trials in 5 observations. Where do you even begin? What are the problems here?
Are you actually gonna measure, are you gonna give 10 trials of each of those sounds in each word position for 5 sessions? That'd be a lot of measuring.
Do you have time in any speech session to give 10 different trials of this stuff too and get everything else done?
Yeah.
You do?
Not for 4 sounds if you wanna do every word position. But one
Well,
sound
yeah,
at a
revisions
time.
over time. I mean, we're not seeing this kid one time and done. I mean, we see them like weekly or twice a week or whatever their provisions are.
Yeah, I think it's super tricky for us because versus writing 20 goals for each separate sound.
Right.
Like that's for
Exactly.
speech pass because it takes to write one goal is so time consuming.
Mhm.
And so if we write a goal for each sound separately, I think that's where we're struggling with.
Yeah.
How do you do it and write it without having to write 20 goals or 5 or
And
4?
if you have a skill progression where you can write like benchmarks within a goal to say, in order to do this, first I want to see this, then I want to see this, and kind of move along the way, that might, but it's still muddy because you rarely get a kid that comes to you just for one little thing. You're dealing with lots of things. So again, I would be looking back to say, okay, Gail, let's think. Are there some things that are probably going to come along with working on other skills? But of those things, what's the big one? What's the one I really want to focus on? Can we narrow this down?
I'm gonna say G because her name is Gail.
Well, that would be an important one too. And also thinking about, okay, well, is she a kid based on her present levels that just getting these things in the initial placement is that all we're going to work on for this next year? Or am I hoping that she'll be able to produce them in other parts of the word? I don't know, because I don't know what her present levels are. But this gets a little unwieldy. And if you have, you can say, okay, yes, there can be 10 trials, and every time that I take some data on this, does that mean 5 consecutive observations? Does that mean 5 out of the last 20? If during a reporting period, any 5 observations? What am I looking at here?
I write it as, I just kind of always do 3, but I'll say like consecutive data collection days. So
Okay.
that it's
So it's not necessarily week by week, it's the when I'm going to collect this data, right? I like the word consecutive or out of this many or something like that, just because nobody is perfect on this. So again, you know, if Gail's getting 10 out of 10 or 10 out of every 10 trials, but she only did this 4 out of 5 times, does that mean that she's not reaching the goal? It may just mean that she had a bad day or she bit her tongue that morning. I don't know. There could be a lot of things that factor into that. Here's another one. Given a 4th grade text, Marcy will correctly answer 8 out of 10 factual questions about the reading in 4 consecutive data collections. I know this is an academic goal, but sometimes you have academic goals in an IEP where you also have some other goals. And I think having a good understanding of goal writing in general, you may have teachers that you're going to be supporting them in how they write their goals, because you could have a beautiful motor goal or language goal that's within a crummy IEP that somebody else is in charge of.
I mean, the first one is if they can do 8 out of 10, then if they're in 4th grade, that's what typical kids, that's 80%. That's
Yeah, we don't know whether she's a 4th
right,
grader,
exactly,
right?
So I guess we don't know her present level, so it's hard to know.
But we've put the condition there. We put the stimulus material is 4th grade level text. She will correctly answer 8 out of 10 factual questions. What I don't know, and what the parent doesn't know by reading this, is this multiple choice? Is this, you know, free recall of something? Is this, is she able to look at the text when she's doing this? I have no idea. And so if I'm a teacher getting this saying, well, can she do this already? Like in my setup, maybe she could, and in somebody else's, maybe she couldn't. Now, hopefully we would have more information in the present levels that help guide us through that. And that's, I mean, we know we focus most heavily on the goal statement on those goal pages, but the other stuff is really important too, that we get all of that in there. She'll answer questions using picture cues regarding a 3 to 4 sentence story given verbally with 80% accuracy. What do you see with this one? Katie, what do you see with this one? Yes. She'll answer WH questions using picture cues regarding a 3 to 4 sentence story given verbally with 80% accuracy.
I just think the 3 to 4 sentences is too restrictive because I don't have time to sit back and write my story 3 to 4 sentences, and then how am I going to ask? Well, I guess I'm going to say questions. And then you're going to have to give like multiple 3 to 4 sentence stories to get all these.
Okay.
You could break down the WH, like simple WH questions and put parentheses what, where, if it's a younger kid, or age appropriate questions, because what, you know, you can ask a what question that's super simple, or you can ask a what question that's for a 5th grader. So maybe saying at their age or developmentally, I don't know.
And the why question is a heck of a lot different than the who question, right?
Well, just what WH in general, there's so many of them. I mean, it's hard to be too specific, but there's also a huge hierarchy of easy to hard.
Right, right. I could give you a 4-sentence story. Jimmy has a dog. The dog is brown. The brown dog is happy. The dog's name is Jeff, right? And ask questions about that. That's a 4-sentence story, but it is super simple, and it's not a lot of details, and you don't even really have a where in there or a why. You got a whole lot of whats and the who's. But that is different than a 4-sentence story. And again, we said verbally, so, maybe auditorily would probably be a better word to truly convey what we're talking about, meaning she doesn't have to read it. But this gets complicated. Plus, 80% accuracy. Again, is it once? Did that do it? Are we looking at a certain number of trials, a certain number of consecutive opportunities? Are we doing this? Are we doing this with a story that's at a certain level? And is this a life changer? And ask yourself that with any goal. Does this matter?
I mean, I think as a speech therapy, I think it matters, like going on to reading and teachers reading and getting to answer questions. And then
Yeah.
reading, yeah.
But if she can already almost do this, it probably doesn't matter. Like if she's pretty much there and we're writing a goal for it, it's probably not going to be a life changer goal for us to work on because
I guess it depends on what her present level was.
Absolutely.
So if you want to get her to 80 and she's at, something.
she's at 20,
Yeah.
right?
I think it would be, I think it's a good goal if you just make it a
Yeah.
little bit more specific.
And you are exactly right. This could be a great goal for Marcy and a terrible goal for Gail, depending on what we know about them and their present levels.
So do you have do you have these somewhere, like the suggested way to write them?
Nope. Because, quite honestly, what we've found, and I think a lot of states have found, is that if we put out examples, suddenly we start seeing them in like every IEP, because they have to be individualized for every kid. So if you just follow that whole piece of making sure that you've got the skill, you've got the condition or the stimulus that's needed, and you've got a measurability component that makes sense for this particular skill and for this student, then you're there.
So at the conference we had with the guy that talked about goal writing in my district, he said, take off consecutive, don't do consecutive. That's not appropriate.
Well, it
And so,
has
like,
to be
we as speech
measurable,
tests were
though.
Like, well, I know. And so, and they also, they did say like the 80%, which makes sense. If you're saying at grade level they can do
Mhm.
80%, then they don't need special ed services. Like we all get that.
Yeah.
But he said take out consecutive, and like all the speech paths were like, what are you?
Yeah, I would strongly disagree.
I know he's in our whole district.
He was from my IEP.
No way! This is not Matt.
Yeah, I think it was that.
Why would Matt say to take off
Well,
that?
I think it was because it was the way that goal was written. It was like consecutive over like this. It was a wonky goal. I could probably pull it up, but it was. I know what goal you're talking about, but it was like don't put consecutive because it was like.
You already had a
That's
measurable
kind of
piece
right.
in
The
there.
takeaway though from unfortunately
Which
our
even-
district. and
Okay.
so-
Yeah.
Like
Because everybody was
Grade level
putting,
kids
he was
would
telling,
struggle
stop putting
with
it
that.
consecutive.
So
A lot
I
of people
think
were
that's what it was.
I would say that he probably then meant don't put it if you've already got, like if you've already got a good measurability piece, if you've already got 80% on 4 out of 5 trials, then you don't need another layer of qualifier. But in this one, to me, I have no idea when you reach this goal. Because if she has the one fluke time that she hit 80%, I am not going to stop working on this or measuring it and discontinue this goal because she is not necessarily there yet. I'll have to talk to Matt about that.
Well, no, but that's just what.
Don't tell on us.
Don't tell on us. We're just-
Uh-huh.
This is kind of off this certain topic, but as an OT, are we, for schools, is it applicable to put in, like, because I've seen within like 36 instructional weeks, or like within 1 year, or?
That you can leave off because I do. It's not going to hurt anything to have it on there. It's not. It doesn't make your goal wrong. But we know that we write an IEP, and the IEP has a start date and ending date. So the expectation is within the scope of that IEP, here's the goal I'm working on. Now, you may have a goal that you add in like midway through the IEP. But again, if you're just starting with that goal, you know it's going to end in 3 months, and I'm writing it based on knowing I only have 3 months to work on this particular goal, and I'm going to set my ending point of where I think I can have this kid in 3 months. You still don't really need to put within so many weeks because it just appeared, and I still know I've got an ending point for that IEP.
What about like the amount of assist? Like given minimal verbal cues, or is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, you're putting in a condition, right?
Yeah, I just don't see it in these.
Well, okay, so here we've got picture cues is the condition or stimulus we're talking.
Not the amount.
Oh, I see. Well, and it's not really applicable in these cases. If you have a student that needs, different levels of assistance and you're trying to decrease that over time, then it's important to the goal. So absolutely, you can put that kind of stuff in there. Or you can also have it as part of a rubric or, depending on what method you're using to write your goal. You may have like levels of assistance that you're progressing through. Mm-hmm.
So, I know we're looking like transition IEPs for some of my high school students, and some of them I had written like minimal verbal cues. And it kind of got flagged as like not very specific to the word minimal.
Mm-hmm.
So where should we put like percentage? Or like should we just put the percentage and take out minimal, or like the number and take out that?
You might say no more than this many verbal cues or something like that. Whatever your definition of minimal is, what does that mean? No more than 2 verbal cues per class period, or which could be, a ridiculous thing for one student, and again could be like really appropriate for another student. But yeah, I would just quantify things. Whenever you can quantify them, try to make them more specific. So we had a question over here about number one, should there be a restriction on number of goals?
That's a good question.
That is a good question, because some districts will tell you, you get 1 goal for this, and you get 1 goal for this, and we're not doing more than that. Which is not, this is an IEP, right? It's individualized based on what the student needs. And so you may have a student who needs 3 different articulation goals because they are very distinct in what we're looking at. And if we tried to cram them together, they would become such a broad mess that you would have no idea, are we meeting the goal or not, right? There's no real restriction on that. Now, you also don't want an IEP for a kid that has 15 goals, and they are out there. They're out there. You've probably seen some where the kid has, this many language goals, this many motor goals. I'll give you my nightmare story. This truly was a nightmare. And I felt so bad for the occupational therapist who was in this meeting, that the occupational therapist was doing some wonderful things with the student, using some yoga poses to build core strength, doing some things on the playground, which is a natural setting, right, to help a student. They were walking across the beam for some coordination and planning and things like that, things that related to different skills. And this parent who was at the meeting thought she was very well versed in IEP writing and goal writing, and felt like that anything you do with my child needs to have a goal connected to it. So if you're going to walk on a beam, how many steps can he walk consecutively? We need a goal for consecutive steps on a beam. Who cares how many consecutive steps on a beam? That's an ends to a mean, or a means to an ends, right? Because we were looking at building a different skill. We need a yoga goal, because we need to, how many poses can this student, the mindset of this, I'm like, okay, if we start doing this and we start breaking apart what every provider instructor, teacher does and write a goal for everything that they do, you're going to have a dissertation in the form of an IEP, and it's going to be ridiculous, and we're never going to monitor that, and none of it's going to be meaningful. Like, who cares about the results of whether or not I met that goal? Because that is not the skill that we're looking for. So you want to think about, again, goals that are meaningful and not goals that have to do with performance on something that is the method, right? Which is why we also don't want to have goals that would naturally come from a lot of our tests. Like sometimes we give tests and then the outcome of the test like almost worms its way into our goals of we'll be able to do this, this, and this. So that maybe next time I give this test, you'll get those things, right? And I want to kind of veer off the subject for a minute too, and make sure that everyone here understands, because I think we did that for a long time because we're hoping that down the road they'll do better on the test and they'll eventually test out, right? I want to make sure that everyone understands that with a reevaluation for a related service, or a reevaluation for primary or secondary eligibility, that the mindset used to be test in with this stuff, and so you got to test out with this stuff. You got to use the same stuff to get out. That is not the way the law is written. When Article 7 was revised, that practice should have gone away, but it didn't in a lot of districts. And so a lot of you probably have kids on your caseload that are ready to come out, but you don't have time to reassess them, to get them off your caseload so that your caseload's more manageable so that you can, the cycle goes on and on. You do not have to do all the same things. And in many cases, for what you guys do, your regular progress notes and session notes are extensive data that is pretty much all you need to get someone off your caseload.
Oh, so can you talk to admin about that?
and I do.
No formal testing is needed.
No.
Sometimes.
No formal testing is needed.
Now, I'm going to tell you
Do you have
that
to get reeval permission?
yes,
Do you have to get reeval?
I would
permission from the
suggest
parent to reeval?
yes.
Okay.
If you're ever going to potentially dismiss from something, and a lot of cases, not all, right? Sometimes you're fighting the battle to get a kid off your caseload. But in a lot of cases, you're having the conversation that he's doing great, met all his goals. I don't really have any other goals that we could work on beyond that aren't just grade level stuff that every other kid in his class is working on. Parents on board, right? Teacher may or may not be on board, but parents on board. And if we already know, we don't just say, oh, at the next meeting we're going to drop it. What I would do is generate a reevaluation notice and be very clear on there. We're not going to be reevaluating his specific learning disability because no one questions it, not in those words, but you're explaining that he's currently eligible for this. We're not going to look at this. We feel like he is ready to exit from occupational therapy or from language impairment. We feel like his progress warrants exit from this, but we need to reevaluate it. Then when you go down and you're unclicking boxes, because on a reeval you can unclick anything that you don't need.
So kind of going back to the signature part,
Uh-huh.
what if you attempt to get, if you have a parent that just is kind of maybe not present, in that sense, and you can't get a signature back?
Okay, so the law is a little different with reevaluations. We know with initials, we don't touch a kid unless we have got permission in stone, etched out. With a reevaluation, we make every attempt to get a parent to consent. If a parent says, no, which we sometimes get that because they believe by saying no, you can't test my kid, which means you can't exit my kid. But that's not really true either. It means I'm not going to do any formal testing, but I still am going to use the data that I have to be able to say whether they qualify or not. And, you know, if we move forward with that as a reevaluation without doing any new assessment, then they may exit out of the system. And I think parents just need to know that. You know, if you believe they're on a particular test, they're still going to show a need, I'm going to do that test, absolutely, to confirm or refute that. Now, it also says in the law, though, that if you seek out permission and put good faith effort into seeking out that permission, we've sent it home 4 times, I've sent emails, I've left phone call messages, all this kind of stuff, and the parent doesn't respond, the district, and so I'm going to push this back to your directors, I would never just do this on your own, can proceed with that reevaluation without consent. Because they're in the system, they're ours, right? They're in special education. Generally, what I've seen directors do is they send out a formal letter saying, we've been trying to get your consent on this. Here's another copy. Please let us know if you're opposed to this. Otherwise, we expect to start working with your student on whatever date. You know, something that kind of puts it a little more formal. But they can do that. Some directors won't. Some directors will say, nope, I'm not even going to risk that. But the law says we could.
So what all has to be included in the report after reevaluation takes place?
Okay, so if you are, say you're not going to do any new testing and you're just using existing information, that's what I would write up. I would have my reason for referral section, just like in any other thing, you know, so-and-so is currently identified under the eligibilities of blah, blah, blah. The reevaluation was requested in order to whatever it is that you're looking to do, whatever change you are considering. You haven't made it final yet because obviously it's a case conference decision. Then I would put review of existing data. So you're probably going to just recap the initial information that you had or the last reevaluation data that you have. And then I would probably have a section that says review of whatever it is that you're using, whether it's your session notes, your ongoing progress monitoring, if there's some parent input that you were given. I mean, you may have parents who just want to state their part in this or input from the teacher, and then a little summary. It should be a one-pager to me if you're not doing new testing.
Do you touch on the developmental and social history at all?
I probably wouldn't unless it is, I mean, there are some times where you may have something in the review of the previous assessment that was really pertinent from that. You know, some of the kids that you all get, especially like early language or motor skills, if those were way behind or if there's a medical condition that was present during preschool or something like that really affected things. But for a lot of our kids, there's not a whole lot in that social and developmental history. And it seems ridiculous to me to put everyone through testing and how the parents do not want to fill out that social and developmental history again. Now, if I haven't tested a kid since kindergarten and I'm testing them again thinking they're still going to stay in, but maybe I'm adding a disability or something in high school, I'm probably going to get an update to the social and developmental history. But in many cases for a reevaluation, I am unchecking that bad boy because, I mean, I still am going to reach out to the parents and say, tell me what's changed, you know? Got new medications, any new diagnosis that I should know about? Is there any major change in your family structure? That kind of stuff may be important, but in many cases, I am not going to make this parent of a 17-year-old kid think back to when did he walk, when did he talk, what, I mean, shoot, I have to go back to the baby book to check that for my child, you know? So again, you have to follow whatever your district policy is, but I mean, I tell directors this too, that the law says that when we get together for determining what needs to be completed for a reevaluation, it's the team's decision about what do we need to test for. And if there's no reason to do new testing in a particular area, we uncheck it, because all you're doing is removing a student from their gen ed setting every time we pull them for testing. They get a little further behind in something. I mean, they're happy to go most of the time until you get older, and then they're not so happy about it. But yeah, I mean, and why in the world would you do a new observation of language when you're doing it every week or every month, or whatever it is that you're doing with the student? You're not probably going to do a new assessment of sensory. You see it every time you work with a student. You're getting feedback on it on a regular basis from the teacher, or probably from the parent as well. I mean, those are things that we have ongoing data that is more than sufficient and going to give you a heck of a lot more than a standardized test ever would. So that was my sidetrack for this. But I mean, I think it's really important that we push back on the system a little bit because we have got to get control over these caseloads. There are so many things that you guys could be doing that is preventative and that is supporting even more students than just students on your caseload, but you can't when you have no time and you're barely staying afloat with the caseloads that you have. So I know I'm preaching to the choir.
So are our administrators, what kind of access do they have to the information that you're sharing?
Depends on what they attend. It depends on what they attend. I mean,
is there anything like an IIP that some of those written guidelines can be put in place? Because we'll be coming back and having these conversations with our administrators.
Mhm.
They're not going to be as meaningful coming from IEP.
The only thing that I can think of that's already out there is there was some guidance that came out, particularly when DD changed. When the age changed, there was some guidance that came out from the Department of Ed that really looked at that reevaluation process, because we had so many kids who before, it was just, you remember the nightmare of the kids who were moving up into kindergarten, and we had to test every last one of them. And we tested like all the same stuff, right? Plus, if we were looking for any other disabilities, we tacked on all of those things too. And now we've got kids who we don't need to test as they transition up, but at some point they're aging out, and they don't magically just drop off your IEP list. We have to do something. But again, for those situations, if we have kids who are identified as DD and we are not suspecting something else, in order to drop the DD, we may have all the data we need. They don't necessarily have to go through a battery of tests. So the guidance did come out on that I think was a little more clear, that it's the determination of the team what data is needed, if any, beyond what already exists. So I know there's been some stuff come out on reevals. The way, when you read Article 7, I feel like when I read the reeval section, it like does this weird little loopy thing where it's like there are multiple stages of, we review this, then we determine if we're going to review this, and then we figure out what we need, and then we review it again. It's like it's written just really strangely. But it basically boils down to saying that at least every 3 years we have to have that conversation about, do we need anything? And if so, then we have to figure out what we need. And that's kind of the bottom line.
interpretation of Article 7 is so...
Oh, it's crazy.
all over the place, which is why...
That's why the practices
responding
are
this
all over the
way.
place, yeah. But I mean, I'm always happy, like when administrators call, and I've worked with a lot of the directors on this issue to say, you're swamped, and here's why you're swamped. Let's dig out of this, and here's how you can dig out. And I'm not saying that we should be slacking in what we do, but there's no reason to do unnecessary testing if the information that you already have is plenty, right? If it already answers the question. And so again, when I know I'm fighting a battle, when I have a parent who says, I don't think they need to come out of this service, there's going to be testing. You know, if you're getting pushback. But there's so many cases where everybody's already on board, but you're like, when can I fit it in? Well, you don't really have to fit it in when you don't have to schedule in a battery of tests and this huge report. And I mean, that's going to tell you what you already know. Never do testing that's going to tell you what you already know. And in fact, I mean, even when you're talking about an initial, and again, this is probably going to conflict with what directors tell you because there may be policies in place, but even on an initial, all of the areas we need to assess come out on the permission form, but it doesn't say how you have to assess them. And if existing data is already there, use it. It doesn't say, I've got to give a self, I've got to give a Goldman-Fristow, I've got to give a whatever, any of the tests. It says you've got to assess that area in some way, right? So, I mean, there are times when you, again, like with academic achievement, you're probably not giving an academic achievement battery in most cases, but you're gathering data.
So Article 7 doesn't say you have to give a standardized assessment, like in language impairment. It's not, because I thought, like, you had to have 2 measures, but maybe it doesn't say standardized, I don't know. If
In order
anybody.
to qualify, I thought they had to be 1.5 standard deviations in 2 areas or 2 standard deviations below in 1.
If you're talking about DD, then yes, you have to. Now, some of your tests, though, are tests, and some are surveys that are basically done just with parents. You may have a standardized measure, or you may be pulling scores from something else. Now, sometimes we get scores, and sometimes we get information. We have to have another way to determine where are they falling. So that one.
For DD, not for.
That I'm not sure about language. You guys will, again, you'll know about what it says for language. There is a place where you're talking about like an intellectual disability that it does say for that you're going to need to have a standardized battery if you can. But there are some kids that are not testable because they are so low that I can't use like an individually administered IQ assessment. I'm going to have to come at it a different way. But those kids are kind of the kids that it's not a question of whether or not they qualify. So I'll pull it up over lunch though and look at the LI
I don't believe
section.
it specifies a standard deviation. It's very broad.
Which is why you have some kids who come into your district that you're probably looking at the results going, really? I wouldn't have qualified this kid, right? Because when they hit that gray area that in one district, it's below a 78. In one district, it's anything below an 85 gets you in the door. And in other districts, it's, oh no, you got to be a lot more severe than that,
So we, even during what did we just do, the online, the ISHA, I don't know who attended that, but they were even saying like how important it is to get into your manuals and really look at well, not even the specificity, but the range of what it really is. So you might have a 78, but the range that it likely would fall in might be 74 to 83. And you can still take that information and look at how it's applying to like their functional communication, and it's not just one dot of a score. You have to look at.
That's true. You should never use like one piece and just say, well, this is a hard and fast number, you're in or you're out, right? But you also don't want to think, okay, well, I've got a kid with a 75 IQ And with the confidence interval, the low end of that dips down into the 60s, so I'm going to place them as mild intellectual disability, right? Unless everything else is pointing to, man, they are really, really low, and I'm going to be willing to stretch that way. And the same thing with your other skills, because you're also looking at, confidence intervals can vary. And if you're talking about, if I look at the high end, it almost puts you in the average range. So you have to take every piece of information that you have into consideration. Where did we start with that? What was the initial comment or question?
Yeah, reevals.
Oh, reevals, yeah. Sorry.
No, you just made us all like really happy. It's just like how
Until you get back.
But then also there's kids that I work in preschool that might score, their scores look pretty okay on the PLS or whatever, but functionally this kid is a hot mess, and he's going to get identified probably within the next year or two, but he needs support, and I can tell he needs support. That score might not validate, might look like, oh, his language scores aren't terrible, but they're low or below, but then functionally, you know, they're not potty trained and they're not social, and so I write, you know, just about the pragmatic, but I qualify them, and I hope I'm doing the right thing. The child needs support, he needs social support, and we need to further test, but it's not like you can make it all happen.
Well, here's another thing, and this some of you may kind of think, oh God. Your services for any student, we know, are based not on eligibility, but based on need. Now, what if you have a student who clearly needs therapy, but they don't really qualify for LI or for SI, but they need it because you're seeing that stuff? Technically, under the law, speech services could be listed as a service even without an LI or an SI designation. Like, I don't have to be identified as a student with a language impairment or a speech impairment to get speech therapy if I need speech therapy. Now, most cases, you're going to have that. But think about all the kids that you have that are in preschool that are DD. DD covers a lot of areas. And there are some times where language may have been one of those areas that was 1.5 below, but you're really thinking, I'm really not sure if they really qualify for language impairment, but I know they need support. And it's part of kind of the package of preschool that we're working on language all the time. We're working on motor all the time. But whether or not you have those specific services or designations.
Like an ED can cover that umbrella.
Anything could cover that, though, quite honestly. I mean, you could, like, there's been a debate for years about, okay, what about my second grade kiddo who is identified as speech impaired, and I feel like they need occupational therapy because there's so much oral motor stuff going on that I need an occupational therapist to help with that. And we've had some directors say, oh, no. OT is only going to be for other disabilities.
Yeah.
Like, no. If they need it to benefit from their speech therapy, then we could qualify them.
Or if their fine motor is a struggle and they have speech only, we can, in our district, nope.
I know.
Can't even get the OT. She could do it informal.
Now, the pushback came from abusing the system, right? From too many people just like tacking on services all over the place. That's where it came from. But under the law, your services are based on your needs. Your needs come from your disability. But I mean, we have a lot of kids who maybe don't, by the book, qualify for LI, but who are on the autism spectrum that have some pragmatic issues that they need some language-based therapy, or they need, you know. Well, I mean, they just, like, their scores just may not line up.
But then you see, you put in the functional part. And
So it's the
then you do
function,
qualify
right.
them.
Well-
I don't see how you would, like, if you say they need the service and they don't qualify, honestly, like, they would qualify because they need the service. I don't understand that.
But it's not just whether you need the service. If you're looking at needing to demonstrate language skills below a certain level, you know, if that's what your policy is. I
So
just,
you're thinking like per district?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Not overall?
right.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure everybody understands, though, that you could have a service potentially for somebody who didn't have the designation. And I don't know. I think preschool is where it hits home most, though, is when you don't want to just keep adding a bunch of labels, especially when you're not really sure that this is going to be something that continues. You know, sometimes with DD, it's a matter of working to catch up certain skills, and they kind of catch up as a chunk. You know, a lot of things are growing at once, and then by the time they're moving into early elementary school and about, you know, mid-first or early second grade, you're not even thinking that they qualify for any other services either.
Right.
Uh-huh.
How does that work on the IG? Because if a kid clearly needs like a preschool and they can't really do a formal assessment, you know, to needs services. Do they still have to have a goal if they don't have that eligibility? Like, if they didn't meet the requirements, but you know it's needed, do you still have to write a goal for them? Do you just
If you're going to have a service, then you want to have some kind of goal, and it's not a one-to-one thing, right? Because services are oftentimes addressing multiple areas, and I mean, we have to keep in mind that the goals are skill-based for the student, not provider-based. So, you know, we often talk about, well, for his speech goal, this, for his OT goal, this. It's not a speech goal and an OT goal. It's his goals around expressive language, or his goal around sensory regulation, or you know what I'm saying, because it cuts across areas. Plus, it shouldn't mean that I am responsible for this goal. I may be the one responsible for progress monitoring it, but as far as implementing the services to support building that skill, it's all of us, right? Because that's the only way to make really any kind of progress. Does that make sense, or did I answer all of it or part of it? Okay. And I know you had your hand up too.
I was just going to say that we have started to do some changes that, like, when a child's, for example, language skill, right, grammar, ability to answer on testing, it's all average, high average, but socially they're a mess. Because or social communication is not very good. There's times now that we're, like, we used to just go, okay, LI, because of that social communication piece. But now we're in early childhood, we're starting to not qualify those children for LI and let the classroom special education teacher address that, which is part of the program. So I don't know, maybe as they get older, it would be the resource teacher and not necessarily the speech therapist. So
It could be, but I mean, a lot of what you guys do in preschool, you're doing in with everybody, right? You're teaching how to use appropriate language during snack time, and you know, this center and circle time, and you're reinforcing all the stuff that you would be in a pull-out setting, but you're just doing it with everybody, because pretty much every one of those kids has some sort of language need, and motor need, and behavior need.
social,
Yes,
emotional needs.
exactly.
goal, but the speech therapist is not necessarily working on that goal specifically with the child. Okay.
It may be. It depends on what your specially designed instruction is. And whether or not you've listed that there is a particular service that's happening. If you say that on the IEP, this kid's going to get at least 20 minutes of speech and language services, then you're probably going to be the one focusing on that more than anything. But everybody's contributing to bringing along this skill. Right. Oh, we have a few more minutes. Yay. Let's talk a preschool goal then, and then when we come back after lunch, we'll kind of pick up with the inclusive services piece. So, give me some examples of what you're thinking for, like, what do you guys typically write at the preschool level? What are you focused on?
Oh gosh, a lot of the kids that we're seeing are pretty
Okay.
So a lot of it, like functional communication, obviously some speech articulation. Sometimes kids come in and can't, their receptive language is average, but you can't even assess their expressive language because their articulation's so poor. So, I think the goals would be, do you guys have any?
Yeah, I mean, it's child specific, but we, you know, usually, I do preschool only too in my district. And so it varies for the kid, but I'll do expressive, we'll do social, I do a lot of social, and so everybody's helping with that.
Mm-hmm. That's just it. The social aspect for not just for preschool, but up, you know, throughout. The social and the language are it's so overlapping. You know.
I'm going to say, like at the preschool level, it's really not easy because we have, you know, caseloads are crazy, but I'm able to do it with my team so well. But as kids get older, like speech paths that have high caseloads, the social part of it becomes really, really tricky for the speech paths when they have such high caseloads and they don't see all of the social difficulty that, like in preschool, it's so obvious because we're in preschool, we see this child needs all of these supports. So I do think it's easier in preschool to kind of do all this inclusive support, and it gets way trickier, I feel like, for you guys who do, you know, elementary, middle, high school.
Yeah.
Especially with the caseloads that people have.
And that's what the whole afternoon is going to focus on is what could it look like? Where can we do it? How can we do it? Not just that you should do it for some kids in some situations, but what could it really look like for students? And I like hearing that you guys are emphasizing it's going to look, your goals at the preschool level are going to look different, right? Because I have been in places where every kid in the classroom pretty much had the same goal, you know, over and over and over again. Because we're working with them all, right, at the same time many times. We're coming in and doing those services right there, but again, they're all starting from different places, and so where I would expect them to be in a year should be different. It should always be different. And it's okay to not say that they're going to have this skill that will put them at grade level or that age-appropriate skill level. If you were going to do that for students, they really wouldn't need special ed. I mean, the expectation can't be that I'm going to catch every kid up in a year. So we have to always, again, look at those expected skills for that age, for that grade, whatever it is that we're looking at, but then really thinking about what are we working with, where are we starting from, how serious is this disability, and what do I need to tackle first in order to keep them moving forward and pressing on. So I think sometimes, you know, I see a lot of preschool goals. There are a lot of academic goals that I'm like, I'm not even sure are appropriate sometimes for typical preschoolers. Like, you know, I think back to a lot of kids that come into our kindergarten classrooms, especially, I mean, during COVID, it's even worse. We get kids who are coming in who have just not had exposure to much of anything but the iPad at home. And they are coming in not knowing a lot of things. And so to take our, in many cases, pretty significantly affected, disabled preschoolers and expect that they're going to enter kindergarten knowing how to spell their name, knowing all their letters, those are things that a lot of kindergartners don't have. So I think that social piece, the communication piece, the self-help piece is huge for these kids. Making sure that they can become more and more independent is really important. And so again, take it back to life-changing skills. What is it that's going to help this kid not stick out and be assimilated into that kindergarten classroom more easily? You know, if this is the kid who comes out of the bathroom, pants around the ankles, That's a problem. I'm going to work on that. That's going to be a big one, right? Or potty training, you know, for a lot of our preschooler, well, not just our preschoolers, but that's a huge one, because think of just how much that affects our kids. Being able to use greetings for a lot of our kids who have little to no language.
Take turn and play.
Yes. Just being able to say hi to friends, or say, will you play with me? Or yes, all of those things are critical, because you think, if I don't have that skill moving up into kindergarten, I'm going to be at a loss, because that's so much of what it is that's happening. Do I respond to my name? That's a big thing for a lot of our preschoolers.
And there's also a standard, like in every grade, about cooperatively working with other students, and if in preschool that is a challenge, chances are, if you look at those behavior kids, older grades, all of them probably struggle to cooperatively interact.
Yep, right from the beginning.
And play.
Yep.
No, I was just going to say, going from preschool, we're more of a self-contained classroom right now, but we transition those kids to kindergarten, and they go from a small classroom with a ton of support to a gen ed classroom of 26 kids and 2 adults, and we play a lot, and they don't play a ton in kindergarten, so it's like we've got these social play communication goals, but then you put them into an environment that is so heavily academically focused, but we still have kids who don't have some of those social skills where, you know, I get it. I was
It's
at
like
a
this,
different-
right, it's a systemic problem, because then our kindergartens, we have no play in our kindergartens hardly at all anymore, and so then the
that's so
behavior kids
wrong.
look way worse, except for recess, and then guess what? They're really bad, because they don't have any support in recess. They have like one. So yes, that is like a huge, and then like the power of play, we know it.
Yeah.
But it's hard, and it's not that anybody's doing the wrong thing, it's that the standards in kindergarten is that they're gonna write 3 sentences before they leave kindergarten, which developmentally.
Crazy.
It's crazy.
Yes. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, it is 11:30. So, does anyone from out of town, do you need help with where to go that's close by? Do you all know what you're doing for lunch? Okay, so we are going to work on for a while talking about the whole moving towards the inclusive practices. And then I had a request for, if we've got some time, to talk a little more about progress monitoring, like so that we're sharing some ideas on how people are progress monitoring different areas. So I think that we should have plenty of time to fit in that discussion. So I want you to kind of think in the sense of not here's what you need to do, and not here's the plan for how you do it, because I don't have that either. But it's more thinking about I wonders. Whether your I wonders are things like, I wonder how my parents are going to react to this. And I wonder what teacher I could convince to let me come and do what I do in their room, right? What other I wonder kinds of things come to your mind when you think about, if we were to provide the services that we provide within that gen ed setting, no matter what that setting is, what questions crop up? Wonder if somebody could help you data track. Do you always have to be the one collecting data? You shouldn't, right? You're with the student the least. Probably out of everybody who is working with particular students, you all see them least of all. And what happens in a therapy session is often not reflected in what happens in the classroom, and that's where it counts the most, right? So who should be collecting classroom-based data? Classroom teachers. But they don't know what we want collected, right? Any other questions that, or potential barriers maybe that you guys see
like how feasible is it? Because some classes only have like one student that you're working with.
Ah,
You can't
great
really reach
point.
everybody by doing that.
And we're going to think outside the box as far as, is a gen ed setting always in the classroom? Right? Where does most social stuff happen? Recess, lunch. Not that I'm suggesting anybody do any therapy in the bathrooms, but there's a lot of social communication that happens in the bathroom, right? Those are the places where I probably don't have an adult to support me, and so my communication, my interaction, my behavior, those things are critical in those kind of unstructured settings too. But very good point. How do you spread yourself among all these different classrooms? It's easy when you can say, from this room, this room, this room, this room, you all come to me, right? I've got this little block of time. But it's a whole lot harder when you think, I've got to figure out how am I going to get in different places. And again, I'm not going to suggest to anybody that you make a 180 switch at any point. We're going to talk about ways to kind of get your toes in the water first and see where it is that we can make the most impact and where it makes the most sense. Oh, got to turn this back on. Okay, so part of what we do as we start to move to a more inclusive model is figure out how we're going to communicate the message to the right people that this is worth our time and worth our effort to do. Because we've got some convincing to do a lot of times. There are a ton of reasons why we would want to do this. The modeling is so important, right? If you break your leg and you go to physical therapy after your cast comes off, the physical therapist never says, okay, when you come here for 30 minutes, however many days a week, that's what's going to fix you, right? That's what's going to get you back in shape. They tell you, go home and you're going to do this throughout the day. They give you exercises to do. They have, your parent or your spouse or somebody else helping you through things. And it's that extended practice that makes the impact, not really just what happens in therapy. That's just a place to teach you how to do things. In order to have our students make the kind of progress that we need, we have to make sure that somebody is doing that same thing with our students throughout the day, whenever they can, those different opportunities. So providing that model for the classroom teacher, for the paraprofessional, for the other providers, right? Crossing disciplines, it's really important that we're supporting all of those different skill sets. So they can do things like hear how we rephrase things. Hear how we prompt. It's not a matter of just prompting. Prompting could be, that's wrong, do it again. Well, that really doesn't help for most kids. That just shuts them down. But hearing how do we do it? How do we rephrase things? How do we demonstrate? How do we use visuals? We can write in an IEP that we're going to use visuals, and most of the time they are not used appropriately. So taking those visual supports and showing someone how to implement them. How do we weave things into lessons? How do we think about things like, we have 2 kids in this classroom that are working on this sound. Could we weave that in, make sure that we incorporate more of that sound into this particular lesson so that they're also benefiting from having to say it over and over again? How do we support motor skills? And then the behavior and social skills piece. Again, I know you all are not behavior therapists or anything like that, but so much of what you do, all of you, relates to behavior. And being able to demonstrate the things that we've figured out how they work, and especially because of such an overlap between our kids who struggle with language, our kids who struggle with sensory, our kids who struggle with motor, it ties in with behavior. And we can teach that. but we're not going to be able to convince teachers to say, okay, I need to teach you this, so when can I schedule a time to do it? Or when can I do a little in-service to share how I do this? That's not the way it works. You're going to be really hard-pressed to figure out a way to make that happen. But if you can go in and just demonstrate it on the fly, that's where it's going to stick, when you can demonstrate it in front of the teacher and give feedback to the teacher when they're trying something to say, almost, right? Here, set it up differently. Do it slightly differently. Make sure and point to this when you're demonstrating that. You know, all the fine points of what we do. So one of the biggest things that we can do is use the models of co-teaching, not necessarily in their pure form, but using the concepts and models from co-teaching to figure out how can we support not just our students that are identified as having needs that relate to what we do, but any other student in the classroom that might be struggling with that. Because there are needs that don't appear on an IEP. I mean, there are kids without IEPs that may have a strong enough need to where in the outside world they would actually get your support, but they don't necessarily qualify or have that plan. For example, I mean, how many kids do you who are speech paths support with vocabulary? You're constantly reviewing new vocabulary, but there are as many kids who are not identified, not on your caseload, that are struggling with that same vocabulary in the classroom as you actually have on your caseloads. I mean, lots and lots of kids. So just going to go through the models really quickly, and I want you to not think about a whole class in the sense of class period, right? Because you can't do that. There is no way that you can say, third hour, I go to your class and, you know, I'm going to be there for the whole time. Because you wouldn't do that when you're dealing with pull-out services. Your minutes wouldn't make any sense for a whole class period. They're typically, that's not the level of service that you have. But just thinking about kind of how this is configured. So one of the models is one teach, one assist, which is kind of what we think about in a lot of push-in kind of settings where the teacher, or I guess it could be you all, for, you know, if you're teaching a particular skill that you feel well versed in, like maybe a social skills group or a communication group or something like that, or not group, lesson for the class. But in most cases it would probably be the classroom teacher, and they're instructing and the other person is assisting. Now what that doesn't mean is one teach, one hang out in the back and see who melts down first, you know, to figure out where I go. Or, I mean, you see this a lot with our paraprofessionals where either you've got a para who is with this kid, and so you see them like drag their chair over and they get like, you know, super close to this kid, and which is embarrassing for most kids anyway, you know. Or you have somebody who's sitting in the back and then maybe they get sent out to make some copies, or they get sent down to take a kid down to the resource room because this kid's having a problem and we just need to get him out of here, you know, all that kind of stuff. So there is, in this role, both people who are in there are in an active instructional role all the time. It's just one is teaching to the whole group and the other may be wandering around, checking work, seeing who's struggling, looking for those faces of who clearly looks like they are not sure what's going on. If that is you, you are also paying closest attention to the kids that you know you're monitoring something specific. So you're listening for those sounds. You're looking for the kid who's struggling to manipulate the paper and pencil, or the you know, all of the things involved for the lesson. You're looking for the kid who needs some support with managing the sensory input that's coming in, or sitting in their chair appropriately because they're struggling with that kind of thing. Whatever it is that you're looking for, you know what kids you should have your eye on, but you're also supporting everybody else. So it's a constant interactive kind of thing. This one's pretty simple, right? One teach, one observe, and these are fluid models, meaning it's not, the period is dedicated to a particular model. It's you're constantly in a model when you're working in a co-teaching kind of setup. So one teach, one observe is similar, except for the second person, really their role is observation. So that may be time that the person who is not teaching is collecting particular data on students. And I don't mean pulling them aside to do testing, but they're recording something. Sometimes it's also providing recording of, going around and checking work and identifying who's struggling with something. So it may be vocabulary. It may be looking at their handwriting samples as you're wandering around the room, just taking some data. And again, it's kind of a frequent model to use, but not for very long at a time. You're not going to spend an entire class period in an observation kind of role, most likely. Okay, alternative teaching. This one I think it could be a lot more beneficial depending on the age, depending on the subject going on at the time, and depending on the skill that you're actually focused on. So in alternative teaching, it may be having large group and small group, right? We see this happening a lot in classrooms where if you have an extra body in there, a lot of times you have a small group, and the small group could be the kids who have already got it that need extension. It could be a group that needs to focus on something that is more a skill that they didn't get, or something remedial, they need some extra support. But we need to make sure that when we're looking at this group, that it's not always the same kids, and that it's not always kids with IEPs. So it's whoever is struggling with that skill that needs the extra support. And that's what makes it a more inclusive kind of model than all my kids on my caseload come back to this table. All right, because again, if you're working, you may have one kid in this classroom that is working on handwriting, but you also may have two other kids that are working on a different motor skill or sensory or something like that. But if I'm working on some things where I know this kid's going to need a lot more fine motor support, you can probably pick out some other kids in the classroom who aren't on your caseload that would fit right into needing that same extra support. Okay? Parallel teaching just kind of gets the numbers down, right? I take the class, split them up, and you've got a lower adult to student ratio. So much smaller, much more intimate, more opportunities to respond for students, more conversation happening. Kids don't have a lot of opportunity to speak in the large group in class. And for anyone who's working on language, we need kids to speak and, have back and forth conversations and elaborate on things in order to practice those skills. And they need to hear, again, what other kids are saying. Kids don't need to necessarily parrot what I say, but they need to talk like other kids their age as far as the conversation and the vocabulary. So again, this is easier said than done at certain levels. You could stick me into a first grade classroom and say, okay, today we're going to do science during this period, and you all are like, science, okay, well, let's see. I don't care what the subject. It's science right now. I've got some kids who are going to need some motor support. Science, that's as good a place as any, right? Or I have some kids who I'm working on vocabulary. Could be science, could be language arts, could be math. You're going to have vocabulary. You're going to be working on something that you can work on language, right? So if you put me in that first grade classroom and say, okay, we're in science, and can you work with this group, and I'm going to work with this group, but we're going to teach the same thing, I can probably handle that. I think I can handle first grade science, but I'm not doing that in physics. I'm not doing that in chemistry, right? Because I don't have the content knowledge to be able to be in this role. I could still go into that classroom and do what I do maybe in a different setup, but not in a parallel teaching kind of setup. Does that make sense? Teaming, I'm going to see less of for you all, because this is, if we had two trainers up here and I may say something and then my co-presenter may say something and it's back and forth and it's building, then that is a lot of what the teaming kind of process is like. And again, you're going to have classroom teachers who probably do not want to hand off their content in most cases to you to let this kind of thing happen. You may, if you're talking about a social skills lesson. You may, if you want to lead a group sensory exercise or a mindfulness kind of exercise or something like that. In fact, they may say, why don't you just lead that and I'll sit back and support, But in most cases on a lot of content areas, you're probably not going to have them want to do a teaming kind of process. Here's where you fit in more than anywhere: station teaching. Now, I would say in preschool, you guys are probably already doing some of this. That would be my guess, is that you may have, I'm going to work with you two, and then people are going to rotate, and I'm going to work with another two, and it keeps cycling. This fits in really well throughout elementary and sometimes even into middle and high school, particularly for speech pathologists where vocabulary is a heavy emphasis. Doesn't work so well with articulation, but if you're talking about language, vocabulary building, all of that kind of stuff, having stations that are focused on something, again, if everyone is shifting in groups, right, and these are mixed groups, so sometimes your group may include a kid that you're working on something specific, and sometimes the group that comes to you next may have no kids that are on your caseload, but they still need that vocabulary support, or they don't, which is fine, because the ones who don't, when they come to you, help the others who do need it, right? But again, it helps decrease the amount of students with any one adult. So with station teaching, you're always going to have at least one more group or one more station than adults. So say Christy and I were in a classroom together, and it was just the two of us. We're going to have at least 3 groups. We could have potentially more, but we're going to have at least 3. We're going to make sure that we set up activities that could go in any order, so it's not that here's station 1 and you have to do station 1 before you get to station 2, because otherwise you got a lot of idle kids sitting back getting in trouble, right? So everything has to be independent of each other as far as order. We have to make sure that we have an allotted amount of time and we're likely to finish at about the same time, because again, you don't want a group finished and then 5 minutes later we finally get to switch, because that's when kids get in trouble. And if we have independent stations, we have to recognize what kids could actually be independent with and not be constantly vying for our attention from one of the adults in the room, because then we're never going to get our group stuff done. Okay. So what I see with a lot of the independent stations are, you may have an independent station that kids come together and they have the instructions or whatever they need. They have their materials. It's very clear. We know they can do it. And they just run that independently. Or it could be, You three are going to the independent station, and you are going to the computer and you put your headphones on and you're listening to the story, and you are going to finish your math homework because you haven't done that yet. You know, it's anything that can be done on an independent kind of basis. So again, vocabulary groups, social lessons, it doesn't matter what's happening as long as you are comfortable with the content that is happening there. So, like, for example, what might be some of the things in an OT pull-out session? What might be some of the activities that happen during that session? Say you got your 20 minutes with kids, 20 minutes, 6 times a month, whatever it is. You know, we write the same things over and over again. What happens in that session?
Like scissor skills, or puzzles, or coloring, writing.
Okay, so could you have that same kind of thing, but with groups rotating in a first grade classroom? Right? It's not going to hurt any of them. In fact, a lot of them, it's going to help build up those skills. What about for language kids? Not all your groups are pure homogeneous groups that everyone has like about the same level, about the same skill they're working on. They're a little mixed. So what might you do in a third grade language pull-out time? I know that's kind of random, but
Pre-teaching curriculum vocabulary.
pre-teaching vocabulary. Can that be done in a gen ed classroom? I mean, how many of the rest of the class need pre-taught vocabulary? My gosh. And sometimes, if you're looking, like if you go back and think about, the alternative teaching, this may be the opportunity to say, okay, we're starting a new lesson, so I'm going to do some in-class alternative teaching where I have a small group that is pre-teaching the vocabulary for this lesson. Not everybody needs it, but who needs it? Well, I know these 2 kids on my caseload need it. Asking the teacher, who else needs it? Who else needs to come back and have this piece happen? Okay, so you're covering your kids, but you're also sharing the wealth with other kids who might need that. Okay, what are your first gut reactions to co-teaching?
The difficulty with the classroom is all the stuff they have to get in to let us come in.
True.
Teacher approval, or you'd have to work with the teacher first to try and get.
You got to have an ally, or it's not going to happen, right? You can't spring this on a teacher and say, this year, here's how I'm going to be doing my services, and we're going to need to work together a whole lot more to figure out what you're doing so I can make sure that what I'm doing complements that and covers the kids that I know have to work on certain goals, right? You got to have a teammate, you got to have an ally. You can't do it in every class. Not going to happen. If your kids are equally spread out across the 3rd grade and I've got 2 in every 3rd grade classroom, it's not going to happen for everyone in that same way. It can't.
This be something that you would do, like, you identify a group that it would work with. Would this be like your every day, like your every week? You know, say you see that kid twice a week, would you be going to that classroom twice a week for the remainder of the school year? Or is this something that maybe once a month I try to do it? Or, like, we had a kid that had behavior issues, and he was having meltdowns during morning work. So I would go in, I would help him, and then if there was other kids, you know, obviously then they would come ask for help too. But it was something where it was specific to him because that's where he was having the meltdown, and the teacher was more than willing to have us come in because out of her whole class, she had 12 kids with IEPs in it. So our school,
That's a special ed class.
Well, they tend to bunch
Yeah.
per
Yeah.
grade once. So that does, our OT does a lot of inclusion in that classroom.
So, okay, here are some of the issues with that. We're supposed to do what's on the IEP as close as we can do it, right? So if we say 30 minutes 3 times a month, we are doing services in a special ed setting, then that is what the expectation is. Now, that being said, we've got some kids that we may need to give some in-class support, some extra support here and there, and nobody seems to have a problem with giving a little extra of something or changing things up every now and then. When it becomes a consistent thing, just like if we were pulling kids out more often than we said we were intending to, and we're doing that consistently, we need to make an IEP change. So we've got to anticipate, what do we expect? So again, if we're starting with present levels, here's where I am. I set the goals. Here's where I want to be in a year. Now I think about, what's it going to take to get me from there to here? And what it's not going to take is those prescribed 20 minutes 6 times a month, because that doesn't work for every kid, right? We have those things that we jump to all the time. I see that most often for speech, 20 minutes 6 times a month, or for OT, 30 minutes 2 times a month. I think that's one of the most common things that I see, which can't work for every kid, right? Because the dosage has to be different. Now, we are not going to be able to say, I'm pretty certain this is going to take exactly 238 minutes, right? You can't do that either. But we want to think beyond class period. So I'm also not going to say somebody needs service for 60 minutes 5 times a week just because the class lasts for 60 minutes 5 times a week. I want to have a conversation at that case conference to say, next year, I think I'd really like to provide some support in either your language arts or your science class or your social studies class, where there's more vocabulary heavy kind of stuff, and I want to work on this. How much time do you think we focus on that, and about how much time do you think this kid is going to need more than other kids? So you may say, well, 45 minutes a week, I'm going to provide some gen ed in-class support. And it may be that Monday we spend a good half an hour on vocabulary, and then Thursday we do a vocabulary review, and that's kind of way the lessons fall out. So there's your 45 minutes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be so many minutes per day or equal kinds of time or anything like that. So, I think we just have to get very creative and very flexible as to how we write services. I think services are better written when they're in slightly larger blocks of time, to say this many minutes per week or this many minutes per month. Although you get some parents who don't like that. I've had parents who push back and say, well, you're saying you're going to do, instead of the 20 minutes 6 times a month, right? You say you're going to do 120 minutes a month. Does that mean you're going to pull my kid for 2 hours 1 day a month? Like, no, that's not. Here's what our intention is. And you put that in the descriptive narrative box of, we plan on giving this periodically, but things change, right? Maybe 1 week we didn't even have any new stuff to work on with that, and so the next week I'm going to give a lot more support, and you balance it out that way. But that's, again, you got to work with what your district guidance is, because districts approach it differently on what they tell you to do. And I think probably speech and OT are the two that get the most dictates about, here's how I want you to write it.
I think also for billing Medicaid, you do have to state the number of sessions you're going to do per reporting period or per week, so there is that barrier as well. You have to say, like, although I want to do X amount of minutes over the reporting period, this is how many sessions I'm going to do it.
So if you say that, but then you deviate from that, then what do they do? Do they decline some of the
amount that you specify?
Yes, if you say I'm going to
Okay.
do 7 sessions or reporting period, you can
regardless of whether they're 15-minute or an hour sessions?
Right. You can see for 10 minutes and that counts. Or you can see for an hour and that counts as one.
Okay, that's good to know, definitely. And do all of you bill? Does anybody not bill? How about that? Okay. And there are a lot of districts that still don't bill just because their people are stretched so thin that they don't have time to, even though there's a pretty big payoff, you know. But they're
tabling it to start billing.
it's free money out there, but it's a lot of work too. Okay, so just quick quiz over models. Again, you don't have to know these inside and out, but if you're talking about an example where a provider might teach with lessons that are connected with things that kids have in their IEPs, and the classroom teacher's keeping data during that time, what model is that?
One teach, one observe.
Correct. Both teaching the lesson together, teaming, small groups with or without your typically developing peers, but in the classroom. And working alongside providing support during the instruction. Okay. There are other models out there. Slight variations of this, and if you look up any of the big names in co-teaching, they all have kind of their little spin on things. One of the things, I think it's Paula Kluth, who comes to Indiana pretty frequently to do some trainings for us. She has one teach, one make multi-sensory, which I really kind of like, especially given a lot of the things that you all do. So the teacher is typically the one teaching, and then somebody else may be helping to act it out or have students do something that's more hands-on or, you know, something like that just to enhance their learning. And so especially for the younger kids, it really promotes a lot of engagement with students. Okay, so this model is based on speech therapy. But I think it's a pretty good representation for, you know, all the different ways that we could come out providing services and what it kind of takes to make that happen. So if you think of them on a continuum from a pull-out model all the way up to doing some more team teaching or parallel teaching or something where you have to do a lot more work with the teacher and do a lot more collaborating, you can see that the level of collaboration increases as you move up that continuum. And if you're thinking about how does this affect things, then we get more and more integration as that goes up. So there's more that you're putting into it, but there's more that you're getting out of it as well. And then we're also looking at how much does it affect our students who have IEPs versus students with disabilities and students without disabilities. So again, it moves toward more students the further you get up that continuum. So it's not that you have to adopt a particular way of doing it or practice, because you are still going to find, I've got some kids who the pull-out model makes more sense. Or time constraint wise, that is my only option, right? All the way to, you know, any of these other things, you may be doing them differently for different kids. So don't feel like you have to say, this year I'm going to do this. It's for this kid and for this kid and for this kid, and you have a different answer. Okay, so if you're going back tomorrow and you think, okay, I'm going to try something. Let's think about, where do you even start? So environments that might be appropriate, where if you're not thinking your office, if you're lucky enough to have an office or a closet or a defunct elevator, which I had one time in a school. That's where my testing occurred, is in an elevator that no longer worked, so nobody was going to use it. So thinking beyond that, where do your services make sense? Where could they happen? Recess? Very natural setting for giving some corrective feedback, for modeling things, for setting up little scenarios and situations to happen. Where else?
I mean, in preschool, we do snack every day and we make it a social learning
Yes.
event for all kids. So all kids are working on waiting, taking turns, and asking each other questions and varying levels depending on where they are. So trying to feed off to each preschool at that snack time and helping your kids.
So snack time for the younger kids, elementary kids in the cafeteria, breakfast time, lunchtime. How many still cannot open their milk, right? There's some motor stuff going on. There's a lot of communication if they're allowed to talk. I hate cafeterias where you are not allowed to talk, because we are missing a huge opportunity for social interaction and communication skills there. What constrains your schedules now? Caseloads are high. Now you're trying to form your schedule, right? You get the beginning of the semester, you've got all these kids, you've got the schedule, I'm trying to plug them around. What do you have to avoid?
Specials.
Yep. Don't take them from specials. They like those.
90-minute reading.
90-minute reading block. Please don't take them from that. Don't take them out of lunch. Kids are going to hate you if you take them out of recess, right? What are you left with? There's nothing left. Math, social studies, science. Now you've got kids who suddenly start getting behind in math, social studies, and science because you pulled them out of those things. If you are doing this on a more inclusive way, there is nothing to avoid. You are going in wherever it is that you can fit your stuff in, because, again, language is always appropriate to the subject. Motor is always appropriate to the subject. Social skills is always appropriate. So it opens things up, even though you may be also dealing with kids who are parceled out in lots of different classrooms. There's kind of a trade-off there. So, related arts, great places to go. Your kids who are struggling in gym class. We have lots of kids who get in lots of trouble in gym class because it is so unstructured, and I don't have the communication to say, stop doing that, or I need this, or all of those different give and take kinds of social language exchanges that we have. Recess and lunch. And then that language arts block is huge. In elementary, we're talking about 90 minutes of very protected time that you guys fit into very naturally. If you could start using up some of that language arts time, you might actually be able to fit things in differently than you would normally. Especially because I feel like most grades do their language arts instruction in the morning. And so sometimes you're left with a whole morning of, yeah, you can write a report, but what the heck do I do during that time block when I can't get in anywhere? There's nowhere to go. And for those of you who cover multiple buildings, which I know some of you do, then you can go to junior high or high school or something like that, but nobody likes going to either of those. Staggering your scheduling too, right? Thinking about, okay, maybe your first hour and a half of the day is language arts instruction, but it doesn't mean I need to be in your class for 90 minutes. It may mean I'm going 20 over here, I'm going 20 over here, I'm going 20 over here, because I'm hitting different kids. Now, the big thing there is I've got to communicate with those 3 teachers to say, okay, where I can only give you 20 minutes. Can you wait and do this piece until I'm there? I can't get in there until 9 o'clock. So from 9 to 9:20, can we do this? That's a hard sell for a lot of our teachers because they teach the way they teach, and sometimes they don't feel like they can flex some of those things. So again, you got to have an ally. You got to have a couple of teachers that you can work with to be more flexible and try to fit some of this stuff in. How many of you have explored this a little bit in some of your buildings in a gen ed setting? For better or worse? Okay. So tell me what your experience was.
Are you talking about when we go into the classroom?
Mm-hmm.
What is our experience with it successful?
Good, bad, or other? Yeah.
Yeah, I go in on certain times, like I go on a building knowledge, which is our language literacy time, and it could be very successful. The disadvantage is if you only have one kid in the class, but I have some kids where we do special needs kids, so I can hit several kids at the same time.
How hard did you have to convince somebody to make that happen?
Not hard in our district, because we've done it for a while.
Okay. And I think that points to the way we've always done it is sometimes the hardest barrier to get around. And so if the way we've done it for a long time has been in a more inclusive kind of model, then even new teachers that you want to bring on board to make it happen, it's not quite as hard of a sell because we are doing it and it is successful. Any other drawbacks that you guys can think of? Other than, you've got kids spread out all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's a drawback, too. You got kids in a lot of
Or you get the students that are not in the caseload that you're helping more than the kids that you need to be helping. That happens a lot.
Now, are those kids, though, that you feel like if you weren't helping them, they're eventually going to get on your caseload? Or they're just needy and not, yeah. Okay. Because, sometimes we're hitting the preventative end of things where if I could just, if I could work with this kid for a little bit, it's that MTSS or RTI kind of thinking of, I can try some stuff and I don't think this kid has a disability, but I think it could develop into something where they would test in if we're not addressing it.
I see scrutiny from staff thinking that you're doing more of like a teacher's aide job than a specialized. It took lots of schooling to go for.
Mm-hmm. So and you want to make sure that you are still, no matter what you're doing, you are in your role as I'm the expert in language. I'm the expert in motor. And I'm here to help support this, but at the same time, I'm also seeing how the lesson that's being taught right now, how can it be tweaked to make sure that this kid gets what they need? That's specially designed instruction. No matter what the SDI is, you guys are the expert that specially design that instruction. That's where we come in special ed. That is the magic wand. It's not that when they come to my room, they're going to be cured. That's not the way it happens. But you all have the background to say, when you have a kid that has this issue, here's some things to try that are proven to help, right? And so we build that in. And again, we're demonstrating that in the classroom. It also takes, it's much more effective when we do this when we can get access to those teachers' lesson plans. Because if we have an idea of what they're teaching, it's easy for us to say, I know you're going to be working on this, and I can tell you this kid on my caseload is going to struggle with this piece of it. Here's the workaround. Or I can look at what's planned for the day and say, oh, I see a natural opportunity to practice this skill that I've been working on with this kid in a real setting where it matters. So again, you may be doing some pull-out instruction and some push-in instruction. It's just a matter of how you're going to put that on the IEP.
And sometimes I think doing both, if you can, if you see a kid a couple times a week if that happens. Some of the downfalls of stations for me is like the 2 kids that I have in a group of 5, they're not paying attention. They're having such a hard time with whatever I'm trying to teach, even with modifications. But it also shows me what that kid looks like in that environment. And so if I'm able to take those students then also for a separate time, which is more small group, one-on-one, then you feel like, okay, you can really hit the goals a little bit quicker and a little bit harder, but the other way shows you what it's like in that gen ed class and what your kid's really struggling with.
Yeah, very good point.
But it's hard to coordinate both.
I guess I'm just wondering, like, when we're talking about documenting provisions and, like, maybe we plan on going into, like, their 90-minute language block. They're done twice a week at one point, and then potentially, like, the other session I want to see them for that week, I want to do more of a pull-out type of method, kind of as she was referencing. How, like, do we need to write that separately in the provisions?
I
How
would.
does that look?
Yeah, I would, similar to how I know some of you will write, we're going to do 30 minutes one time a month of individual, and we're going to do 20 minutes 3 times a month of group, right? So you have 2 different lines. The only difference is you would have one that the code would be SE and one that the code would be GE because you're providing it in that gen ed setting. And just thinking about the number of minutes. You don't need to say on there that it's going to happen during language arts block because it may not. You may hope that that's where it's going to happen, but you just know you're going to provide some classroom-based support and instruction, so many minutes per month, reporting period, week, however it is that you choose to write it. Yeah. Again, it's transparency to the parent to say, this is what we think will do the trick. And I think that's a great way to start, is by doing a little bit of both. And then you may be able to decide, this is not working for this kid, we need to strictly go with this, whichever one that is, you know. Because especially as you start backing down services, you know, a lot of times when you're getting close to dismissing a student, you're going from therapy setting to consultation to out, right? That's usually the progression is I was giving you direct services, then I moved it to consultation. We did that for a year. You really didn't need anything, and now we're going to talk about dismissal. And I think there's kind of that step in between of, you know, let's look in the classroom too, because sometimes we dismiss a student and think, yeah, but that's not how they look in the gen ed classroom. Generalization piece is the hardest piece about any skill that we're doing, whether it's something that you all do or whether it's an academic skill that we're working on. Getting it to generalize to other settings, other people. Because again, you probably hear a lot when you come to a case conference and say, he can do this and he can do this, and you see like that look like, I've never seen him do that. Well, he does it with me. Well, I've never seen it. Can you videotape that? No, I can't videotape. You know, you've had these conversations before. And I think being able to really see what happens in that gen ed setting or in a natural setting for the student can be very, very helpful. Yeah. This is the hard part. Figuring out how do we communicate. Communicating on the planning end, right? Because we have to communicate with our teachers to figure out what are you going to do and how can I be a part of that, and you know, where can I support you and where can I support the, you know, the different activities that are going on. How do we schedule this mess? How are we going to do this for certain kids and not others, which is probably a yes, you know, because you can't be everywhere for everyone. Communicating that even when I come into your room, they're getting their service, right? So the person that I used to partner with on this training was a speech pathologist, and she she tells me that she worked super hard one year of really switching to a more inclusive model, and was even putting in extra time in the Gen Ed classroom. She was going in, she was running groups, she was supporting students, and she would be in there for a good hour, and then the teacher would ask her, so when are you going to take him? He hasn't had his speech yet. She's like, no, he did. You saw it. It was happening here. Communicating that the support that I'm giving is the special ed support. It's just happening here. And that's, again, it just comes with education of the staff that we're working with. So educating teachers, educating your administrators that, yes, this is an allowable and beneficial thing. Educating parents, right? Because if we're making a change on the IEP, I wouldn't just make the change. I'd be very deliberate in saying, this year we're going to try this because, and here's why, right? You give them those points of how it can be really beneficial. It's also educating the student. Have you ever had a student go home and mom says, have you been in speech this year? Nope, not all year. And the parent calls furious because you haven't been giving my child speech this. I mean, it's because the kid didn't recognize that since I don't go to your room anymore, that doesn't mean that I'm not getting speech services, right? So for our kids, there has to be an education component with them as well to say, here's where you're getting your support. What else do you need to communicate about besides the lesson and the schedule?
The goals, the kids working.
The goals, right? So teachers get a copy of the IEP at a glance or a copy of the full IEP, doesn't matter which, whatever you do in your district. They need to know what those goals are. And they need to know about the specially designed instruction. Specially designed instruction is not necessarily specially delivered instruction, meaning it doesn't necessarily mean that you all and the other special ed teachers are the only ones who provide it. It means you designed it and you said, here is what it's going to take to help this kid. But again, it's not because I only see them 30 minutes a day or 30 minutes a month or whatever it is, that's the only time they get specially designed instruction. They should get it all day, anytime it's the right opportunity to put that in. So if your teachers don't understand that this kid needs pre-taught vocabulary, then the only one pre-teaching vocabulary is you guys. And that's not very helpful. Same thing with, anything else we're using. If we say, this kid really has to have graphic organizers. Well, most of our teachers are more of an expert in graphic organizers, but if they see it on an IEP, they may think, well, somebody related to the IEP, right, is going to implement this or use this. When it's a team, and that team includes the gen ed teacher, so it's important for them to know what their role is. And if we can say, I'm in here for this time, so when I'm not here, I need you to do A, B, and C. I need you to make sure that this is happening. I mean, think about how this applies to our kids who need behavioral support. They need it pretty much every minute of every day when they're at school. If they needed that behavioral support, somebody's got to be keeping an eye on those things and making sure those preventative strategies are in place. And it's not just when somebody from the special ed realm happens to be in the classroom. Again, it's communicating that message, because I think for a long time there's been that misconception that special ed is only delivered by special ed, and it's not necessarily. When you consider that it's talking about specially designed instruction is part of what's needed. And yes, we have staff that are coming from a background that they can help design that. We're not expecting gen ed teachers to come up with this necessarily, but they can carry it out.
Would you suggest putting some of those under the accommodations tab?
I feel like teachers refer to that more often.
Well, if they're truly accommodations, then yes. But otherwise, I think we end up with so much stuff in the accommodations section that are not accommodations, or they're not accommodations for the student, they're accommodations for the parent. Like, I understand that for a lot of kids, we need to have parents are wanting like a weekly update of what goes on. I get that, and I would want that in the notes somewhere. But that's not really accommodating the student. Now, a daily homeschool communication journal for a kid who can't speak, that's accommodating the student's need of, I can't tell mom and dad anything about what happened during the day, and we've got to accommodate that somehow. So that really is accommodating the student. But for that parent of the junior high kid who says, he's missing all this work and I want a weekly report of everything, and we cave to that, which is fine, whatever, but that's not really accommodating the student's disability in most cases. So yes and no. I mean, you're right, they do pay attention to that because they know they're going to be held accountable for accommodations to some degree, although many teachers still expect that if there are accommodations that most of them somebody else is going to carry out. If they need extra time, they're going to the resource room to get that extra time. If they need it read aloud, somebody else is going to read it aloud. And not all teachers. Some teachers naturally do that very beautifully in their classroom. But others just expect, that's not my thing, that's a special ed thing. And again, we've got to circle around this kid and stop thinking yours, mine, it has to be ours in order to really move to true inclusive practices. Anything else related to communication? Did you guys encounter anything with your building related to communication?
I think sometimes our lack of communication is that planning time to be, trying to put that in. As far as the SDI, I'm not sure our teachers truly understand that that's, I think when we talk about it, they know it, but I think they see it again as a special ed person's responsibility. So not every one of them, but some of them.
A lot of that just is also top down. Like
Yeah.
education, at least in our district, is so separate. Special education versus whatever's happening in general ed. That's probably across everywhere.
And it's not very often that your special ed administrators get access to sending out information to gen ed teachers. They may be told, oh yeah, you can have an in-service day with your people, right? And usually that's not who we need to communicate the message to in a lot of cases.
Or if the program director would come in service.
And then we've got kind of the opposite too, that you all are left out of a lot of the reading workshops and the, other things that really affect what you do, but you're being told, no, your special ed stuff, you don't need to go to that. It's okay. And I think it would be more beneficial to have everybody really crossing over and connecting with what goes on, because it does interconnect, Okay, creating those teacher partnerships is really important. And again, we need to kind of share those bullet points of why it can really be effective. One is to tell them that, we could help a lot of people with this. You've got other kids you're concerned about that are not on my caseload, so I want to make sure that if I have a trick that could help other students, I can help teach you that, because I'm not going to be in here that often. And if we think about the way that IEP goals are written, and we're really looking at the skills, those skills could potentially fit into a lot of different areas of the curriculum. So they don't have to be tied to a particular class or tied to a particular experience. Again, we can work in expressive language skills into just about any setting or class. Maybe not music. That might be a little more difficult, but I'm in most situations. And you know, the same thing with OT related kinds of skill areas. We can fit those into a lot of different things. And if we can look at lesson plans, and this is an if your teachers write lesson plans, right? I cannot believe how many places that I've gone and said, you know, do you have to upload your lesson plans? Do you do them month by month? Do you do them week by week? And they say, oh, we're not required to do lesson plans. Like, what do you do if you're sick today and you got to have a sub tomorrow? Oh, we just have sub plans, and the sub plans don't even connect with what's happening like on a daily basis, which just kind of, I find that a little crazy, but I also don't want to flip to the other end of let's post everything we're going to do for the next year on our school website and have everyone scrutinizing that. So I won't push on that. And then the last piece is the most critical, that if we are going to work towards generalization, then we've got to get in there. We've got to see it in different settings, and we have to reinforce that skill all the time. Again, you're not just going to your physical therapy appointment and going home and letting things heal up. You are practicing, you are doing repetitions. If you're doing it wrong, your therapist is probably going to tell you, nope, you were doing it wrong, let's do it a little differently, and then you can practice it better for the rest of the week until you have to go back. So same kind of thing. If I want a good outcome, it's going to have to be reinforced by multiple people throughout the day, and it's going to have to be practiced in many different settings, not in a therapy room. So some of the things that we can share with parents and administrators, and I'm pretty sure, oh my gosh, I forgot to look up the Padlet. Do either of you guys have have access to the full Padlet, not the one that's on the, I don't think it's just on the Resource Center page. Yeah, check and see if you can find that and write that down, so we'll give it to everybody. But I think we've got a flyer that we had developed for if people wanted to give this to their parents, to their administrators, to make a case for this, because sometimes you are going to have to like market this out there to make any of the changes happen. But we talk to people about least restrictive environment and really how this can affect things. So you may have some kids, if this is a speech only or a language only kid, they are probably a 50. 99% of your kids are a 50 if that is their only disability. No matter how much you pull them out, more than likely they're still going to spend 80% or more of their time in the gen ed classroom. Now, when you are an added on secondary disability and or related service provider, every minute is added in to figure out, am I tipping over that line where suddenly I'm a code 51? Which means one less code 50, right? And districts are pushed to look at having a certain percentage, a minimum percentage that is a code 50, and low percentages of other things, right? So we want to always strive towards that, and a lot of districts are in hot water for this. A lot of them spend a lot of time with our resource center just because their numbers are not showing as much inclusion as we would like. You found it? Good. So we have to look at that, because sometimes that 20 minutes 3 times a month is what tipped them over the edge. And we've got to think about some other options for becoming more inclusive. It's not all you guys, but I'm just saying it adds in, right? The whole pot of numbers of minutes that you're pulled away from your non-disabled peers. We also want to make sure that we're providing those supportive strategies to teachers. We're modeling those things as well. And I think when we can let administrators know and parents know that my magic then gets shared with other people. And I'm going to teach other people to support those things that we're working on, so we ought to make quicker progress by doing that. We can help with differentiation if we can explain it, which is why I'm going to this training this summer. So I would encourage you to look at the differentiation training. Stigma, right? When we're in the classroom, it becomes very normalized that I'm just a person who comes into your classroom. I don't necessarily get to be seen as somebody different. I've had so many kids who have said, oh, I thought you were a helper, or I thought you were this, or I thought you were that. Not, I know you're the psychologist, right? Because the older kids get, the more pushback we get of, I don't want to go down there anymore. So we have to do things differently. And if we are, if we've been pulling a kid out for years and they're pushing against any sort of pull-out service, and we suddenly say, okay, then I'm coming in the classroom with you, that's not going to fly either. So the earlier we kind of normalize push-in services, the more that those kids just see us as, I come in and out of your classroom and I help with things. That's just what I do. And then really helping with generalization and making things a lot more meaningful. So if you're in different settings, and it may not always be the same setting every time, but this week I'm going to visit you during recess, and this week I'm going to come in because you've been having more problems in the cafeteria, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time there instead of recess. I also get to see kind of that transfer of, boy, you were having problems with this particular kid in this setting, and I see it in this setting. I'm looking for the connections there. And then you can also share back with the kid. This is one of the benefits, I think, of paras that sometimes go in and out of different classrooms, is they can help connect with kids, and you can do this too, of, remember last week in social studies, we were talking about this? This is similar. Classroom teacher, if it's a classroom teacher that I am in my room and the kids come and go, they don't see what happens in all those different areas because they're always glued to that classroom. But if you're going in different places, you can make those connections sometimes for students that the classroom teacher may not be able to. So this really all gets to the why behind why would we want to even do this? Because it sounds hard. It is hard, at least at first. I think over time it gets easier. It becomes just more part of what you do, and I think it adds a nice layer of flexibility for a lot of people that they didn't have before. But on the upfront, it is not an easy task. But this is why you would want to make those shifts in what you do. So when you are partnering with different teachers, it is a relationship. And so you have to have some conversations. You have to have a conversation about when can we communicate. There are some teachers that say, do not call me before 8 o'clock in the morning. I will not answer, right? When I'd be the person saying, well, I can meet you at 6:30 and we can hammer this out for the day. No, not everybody operates the same way. If you try to reach me past 8 o'clock at night, you're not getting me because I'm probably asleep. That's the way I operate. There are some people that don't want to have email or text conversations. They want everything to be face-to-face. You got to hammer out some of those details. Thinking about some of the philosophy pieces and also things related to behavior. Co-teaching can sometimes be difficult because you're coming in as another well-qualified professional in a classroom, but yet you are not the master of the house, right? This is somebody else's classroom. And that can be difficult because if another kid comes to you and says, can I go to the bathroom? And you go, Mrs. Smith, can he go to the bathroom? Right? It's like the chain of, can I answer? Can I not? Right? If a kid is doing something wrong, can I correct it? Do I need to let the teacher know and have them correct it? There's no right or wrong answer to any of those things, but there has to be an understanding about how we're going to handle this. There may be some issues with, there are things that you may allow kids to do in your classroom, snacking, right? having a drink with them, chewing gum. In fact, some of you may encourage chewing gum for different reasons, for increased focus, for oral motor stimulation, but it may not be allowed in that classroom. So you got to talk about some of those things that you don't want any kind of conflict between the two adults to interfere with what's going on in the classroom. And you never want students to see any of that kind of conflict. So the more that you can work that kind of stuff out in advance, the better. Recognizing that if I'm working in 3 different classrooms, then I got 3 different personalities to iron things out with, which again can sometimes be difficult. Thinking about kind of how things operate in the classroom too. You may come in thinking, boy, it would really be helpful for me to encourage more communication if you had kids seated at clusters or pods or whatever, and the teacher is a row kind of teacher, right? You're like, yeah, but then they can't have the good conversations. And you may have that kind of a conversation with the teacher saying, could you consider trying it in this way, because then I can facilitate more of what's going on with the social communication, or I can more easily group students differently if I need to, whatever needs to happen there. And then you got to think about some of the logistical issues of, okay, well, we're all part of the team, right? Again, these are not my goals. These are the kids' goals that we are all working on. So what do we do if something needs to be changed? Who facilitates that? What do we do if we need to make contact with the parent? Am I doing it? Are you doing it as the classroom teacher because it affects everything? Is it an IEP issue? Is it a delivery issue? Again, I don't have any answers for you. I'm just telling you those are the kinds of things that may come up that need to be talked about. And then working with parents. So this, I think this is what we might have put this in that thing on the Padlet. So just giving you some language for how can I communicate this to parents so that they don't feel like you're trying to pull one over on them, that you're trying to take away a service or lessen the intensity, because honestly, the intensity is not necessarily less. It may actually be more intense depending on what you're working on. Now, I want to emphasize again, if you've got something that you need very specific things to happen that are not going to lend themselves very well to a classroom setting or for other kids to see, then it may be best to have those things happening in a pull-out setting. So if I'm sitting with a mirror in front of me and I'm working on movements or things like that, then probably it's going to be a distraction in the classroom. So what's the bottom line with this? I mean, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to be inclusive? Besides the law. It's more functional. There is no special ed Walmart. I mean, that's the bottom line. Kids, no matter what their disability, no matter how severe it is, are operating in the same real world as other kids. They need their skills to transfer wherever they go. They're not, I mean, I think with some of our kids, we keep them very isolated, protected. We work diligently on skills, and then when we try to release them, we're like, why didn't that work? Why didn't that transfer over? We have to recognize that kids are, in most cases, playing on the same playground, eating in the same restaurants, going to the same churches, going to the same Walmart, you know, and they have to be able to work within and live within a very mixed world. And if we keep them isolated, we could maybe make more progress on very individual skills. But in the long run, it's not going to be what we're looking for. All right, questions before I switch topics for a minute? Or reactions, thoughts? Okay, I want to take just a little bit of time because I know this group brought up progress monitoring. Let's talk about progress monitoring. So I wanted to open it up to you guys first and just say, what do you want to talk about with progress monitoring?
I feel like we have gone back and forth on what we prefer, and as a district, what we prefer. A lot of us were doing descriptive, and then we kind of got feedback that that wasn't great. Collection of indicators, I never get to work well. I've been liking rubrics, but then as I transition some things onto AP5, those don't. I just would love to hear from people what's working. And then also, like, if we were talking about we write a goal, like, across 3 consecutive data days, and then we usually say that we're going to progress monitor so many times a reporting period. Like, what is that looking like for people? So, I guess I just want people's brains. That makes my head hurt, and I can't decide what I like.
So how many of you on a consistent basis are using descriptive? Okay, and then what does your documentation look like?
I like to pick descriptive, but I still put objective data, so I'll still write a number. You know, they got 5 out of 7 in the initial, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, whatever, initial, medial, final. So I put a lot of objective data, but the reason that I don't like the single point is because sometimes if you write a goal, that your annual goal is that in a year's time they'll get to this in their spontaneous speech, then if you, the first quarter, are working at the sentence level, you can't put in a percentage, or the percentage will look super inflated because it'll be like 80 and then it goes down. So I only pick the single point data if, like, we're already working at the level that I'm going to be working at in a year's time. So if I'm already working in their spontaneous speech, I will pick that because it is nice to see the graph. But if I'm going to be working on multiple sounds, I never pick single point because it gives you really no information if you have a graph. If, well, this time they were working on F, this time they were working on V, then SH.
Right, you're comparing apples to oranges and you can't make a graph on
And
that.
then it can freak the parents out if they don't
Yeah.
understand. Like, I always try to, if I do accidentally pick single point and I should have picked something else, I'll try to explain it, but it can look really bad if they go down.
Single point is beautiful for things like oral reading fluency, right? Where you are just, you should see like the same data over and over again. But you're right, when kind of how you're measuring it switches, or that the skill changes slightly, then it's going to create some wonky stuff.
But there's also a section, right, like Fidelity wants to be able to justify, I think that, like, I'll tell parents too, that's why it's so important to say, like, with minimum prompts or with whatever,
And if
because
you do a
even if they're at
narrative.
80%, it may be maximum multimodality cues. And so it's more than just the number, it's what is
Right.
it taking for the child.
And I
to
think
get to
for
it.
single point and the other ones, you can do a descriptive documentation, so you could do both, but that descriptive documentation, I mean, yes, it takes more time, but I feel like it gives the parent a whole picture. not
It does
just
if you
that
do a good
one
job
little
with it.
point.
Right? So we have some people that might write a goal and click descriptive, and they're not describing much in that section. So yeah, I think maybe a couple other examples of what kinds of things you're writing in descriptive might be helpful, and then we'll look at the others too. But
But I'm saying, like, even in the single point.
yes, yeah.
We used to do descriptive, but have objective data, but then for whatever reason it was decided that we shouldn't do that. So I just was curious if anybody else had heard that.
Our district advised us to not use that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's the reason why, because You can't control the quality of what, you may have beautiful descriptive data and somebody else writes like one sentence that the parent's like, well, I have no idea what my kid did the last 9 weeks, So, yeah, there's...
The opposite problem in our district with our inclusion teachers, they'll pick the single point, and then they will just put a single point,
So their
and they
progress-
won't write anything.
So their progress margin is like a number, and so that's great, like it gives you a number for that goal, but again, how does that relate to the
Yeah.
whole child, what truly matters?
And what the law says is that we have to report out on the progress as often as we give progress to Gen Ed peers. So if we do it every 6 weeks, or we do it every 9 weeks, or every trimester, whatever system you're on, that's when we have to give the physical copy of here's how they're doing on all these different goals. Now that should not be interpreted as that's how often I should collect data, because one data point is almost meaningless. I mean, really, like 8 to 12 data points is honestly what is considered decent data to create a trend line. Now, most of the time, unless you are doing daily data on a student, which I would not advise, you are not going to get that many across one 9-week or 6-week, whatever period. But over time, if you're taking weekly data, you don't have to put it in every week. You're collecting it, right? You're writing it down somewhere, and at the end of that 9 weeks, we should have 9 data points. Or if I'm doing it every other week, then I'm going to have 4 to 5 data points. But one data point is pretty crummy. I mean, if you had to defend that in court, it's going to look bad. It's going to look really bad. So yeah, I think when you're relying on the one data point, it's not helpful. Now, collection of indicators. Who's using that? It's not easy, is it? Yeah. Now, it can be very helpful for some of our complex situations, or where we've got a lot of different skills and we just can't really put a number necessarily to it, but I need to be able to assess, is the student making progress? But yeah, it's not easy. So what's your experience been so far?
Well, so I feel like a big place we're using it is articulation goals, where
Okay.
you do have a student who's working on more than one sound. And so something we talked about was if you have, you're working at R in isolation, but you're working at TH in sentences, when you go to write your collection of indicators, you can have 2 separate rubrics, right? So your rubrics can look totally different, where your R rubric is just trying to get them to the word level, and that's mastered, but your TH rubric is trying to get them to conversation, and that's the mastered level.
And you're doing that in one goal, or do you have 2 goals?
So it would be one goal, and then you have your objectives, and then you write your collection of indicator rubrics, but those look totally different.
Right.
So we've kind of gone back and forth on, is that acceptable,
Doesn't it summarize though, if you've got 2 objectives, and then it averages the 2
Right.
objectives? So I've tried it and I was like, then it looks like they haven't made any progress, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I can't find a way that I like it, but I didn't know if you had a different experience with it.
No.
We were told to stay away from it because of exactly that. It skews the representation.
But we've been told that you can't put more than one sound in a goal. So then you could have potentially, like you said, 15, you know what I mean, not 15,
Right.
but, that many goals, so like to try to consolidate, and we're not allowed to have benchmarks. So,
Can you do like processes though? Like I know like you're not gonna make it for SF, you know what I'm saying? Like, can you make it a stopping and you've got all of those sounds that could be affected by, like
only
I
if
get
it's
what-
something that fits neatly into that box.
Yes.
Yeah.
What?
Oh,
Oh, only if it fits in that box.
yeah, but like, her example of what was it,
R
R
and TH.
TH,
That are very
Stuff like
different.
that.
Yeah.
a category into that,
Sure,
what I
that's
mean?
very different.
I think what it boils down to is you need to pick, and I know you have to pick what your district tells you you're supposed to pick, but you need to pick the thing that is going to best convey how the student is progressing to other people. Not to yourself. You know how they're doing, right? You're the one who really sees what's going on. But having a way to clearly communicate to parents, here's where we made progress, here's where we didn't, here's where we went backwards, what method for this kid and their skills that you're working on is going to convey that most clearly. And again, I don't have an answer.
I mean, the thing that's tricky about it is like we collect, weekly notes. I'm sure we all have really good notes. And so to go into IEP, if it's single point and put like you saw them 7
Right.
times and you put one in each time, and then your Medicaid billing, well, when can you see the kid? I mean, it's the whole thing about
Yeah.
like at that 9 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, just trying to effectively communicate what percentage they are at each goal. And I still think we don't have the answers with our tick and separate sounds, because it's, unless you can, describe each sound and kind of what you've done this 9 weeks, it gets really tricky. But it's like a time management thing. We have weekly notes, but if I'm supposed to put that in IIEP and single point, like, then you can forget my Medicaid billing or my planning for next week. It's just tricky with our caseloads and how to do it right.
So if we can get some of these kids off your caseload with that reevaluation process, then maybe that would help. I mean, when I work with psychologists and we talk, I mean, it applies to all you guys too, but when we talk about meeting timelines and how do you make all this happen, I mean, one of the things that I tell them is you've got to block time on your official calendar for writing, for data entry, for lunch, right? You have to take care of yourselves in order to make all this happen. And I think I found that if I don't block out a short amount of time, like we have this crazy thing at our office called Zoho, and we enter all the stuff that we do into Zoho, and it's not exactly a time tracking, it's more of an event. When we work on certain things, we have to upload them. So similar to progress monitoring or entering therapy notes or anything like that. But I'm the type of person that sometimes I wait until the end of the month, and then it takes me twice as long to go back and to think about what did I do, when did I do it, what in the world, where was I at, cross-checking with my calendar, looking at my email in and out to see who did I talk to about what. And it's so much wasted time. If every day I built in 10 minutes during this hour and 10 minutes during this hour and said, nobody can come in here, this is my Zoho entry time, I could keep up and it'd be more accurate and I would save a ton of time. I don't do it because I'm not a well-organized person. But when I was working as a psychologist in the schools, what I would have to do is say, okay, I'm blocking out testing from 10 to 12:30. Well, 12 to 12:30 was some writing and scoring time. Because if I didn't, what do you do with that stuff? You take it home and you score it there and you write, and don't do that. It's so bad. I mean, it is so hard on your personal life when you drag work home. But with caseloads like you have, I know you're just trying to stay afloat in a lot of cases, so I recognize that.
And building out that time in your schedule it kind of makes a case to your leadership that you need more support. Because if you can't do your job the way that they expect you to do your job during the day, then there needs to be a way to find more support to you guys. And you guys are not a dime a dozen, to be very honest. There's not a lot of you, but making sure that they know that you're seeing all your groups, and if you cannot get it all that done within a day, just make sure that blocking that stuff on your calendar, because that's data, right? Like you're documenting that you were getting all this done, but you had to take home this much work because it had to be done. But making that note, don't take home, but you know what I mean. That's really important. So Angie's right. Just document that stuff. Block out that time.
I totally agree with that, but I feel like in our district, we're like, if we take a sick day, we're responsible to make up all of that time. So then
Yeah.
all of that time is all eaten up by makeup sessions or,
Do you
so
do you write them in so that it's like if your quarter is 9 weeks, it's roughly 9 sessions that you see that you
no
do?
7.
Okay, so like
For me.
if you
We've changed 12.
can't, so that doesn't give you a little bit of.
It does, but it's still, it's still hit or miss.
Yeah.
And then you also have testing, you
Mhm.
have school
Case
functions,
conferences.
conferences, everything
Yeah.
that disrupts your schedule completely.
Yeah.
So then like, yeah, so you're constantly using up all your actual time to do
Yeah.
your reports or do your evals or do your planning by making up just random stuff or attending conferences.
Now, I've always been told that if a kid is absent when you were supposed to have a session, that you don't make that up. Just like you wouldn't make up if they were gone from their special ed reading time, right? They just missed it
It's
for
probably
that
more our
day.
personal guilt than our admin guilt.
But
We're just like,
you also can't bill for it.
Take a sick day. 'Cause now I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be way behind. Or we had President's Day, so a whole day of kids was missed.
Yep.
I gotta make that up. 'Cause my provision's like.
Is there a way to allow for like?
I don't write anything, but that's a day off for the district, so I don't make up Mondays that we're off.
Or Mondays can always be like a paperwork day, because you guys, you have Mondays off a lot, or.
I think the problem is when you're restricted by don't take them out of reading, don't take them out of specials, don't take them out of this, don't take them out of that. And then, holy cow, when it comes time for I Learn and I Read, you don't get anybody for weeks, right? Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you've got all of those things that are restricted, so trying to set aside a day usually doesn't work because you're trying to.
So what's the
Yeah.
solution? I mean, like, coming from skilled nursing to here, this program is not user-friendly. And I know that the goal is to modify it to each student, but I feel like there's a lot of redundancy in the IEP program that you're going back and you're restating the same thing over and over. Or, like, if you have to do, like, it's the annual case review, what parts do I have to update and what ones don't because it's still there? What am I supposed to take out or not? So coming from like a skilled nursing to this, I mean, like my school coordinator has been amazing, but she's not a speech path. So knowing what I need to, especially if I'm picking up a kid by myself, like what information do you guys expect me to put in there? That's what I thought this was. I didn't know it was an inclusion one. So I thought it was more based on like, here's the basics, like this was what we expect to see and your reasons, that's what I thought this was more based on what you expect in a speech only IEP.
Okay. No.
Yes.
It's not. And I'll tell you one thing that I can send you guys if you're interested, and I don't know, it's not going to be as helpful because it's written IEP in general, because we know it's the same IEP no matter what your disability. But I do have, and it's not quite up to date, like I think it's not quite in the same order because you know how accommodations has floated around all over the IEP. But I have an annotated IEP that I can send you guys because there are several of those boxes in the IEP that most people feel like I wrote the same thing here as I wrote here as I wrote here, and they are very different. And so sometimes we're writing like our rationale for services, our rationale for placement. Those things are different. And so it's not an example IEP per se. It's more, here's what you should write about in this box. Here's what you should write about in this box. But I'm happy to send that to you guys.
I mean, we all have like cheat sheet IEPs and things to put in, but yeah, definitely to have more of an idea, because yeah, I do feel like our district said we should have a template after the IEP that had every single box rewritten. No, this was like rewritten, so you copy and paste it in addition. So if you have two computers going while your parent's sitting there and you copy and paste what you put in reason, justification for why they need this service, then you would copy and paste it onto this template that would go at the end of the IEP.
No.
After some fighting, they let it go because we were like, this is really redundant for parents,
Yes.
which is already tricky for parents. We already have so much language in there that is hard for parents.
I see a lot of stuff in the IEP notes too that is basically rewriting what's already in the IEP.
That's what this template was.
Yeah.
You know what we need is
Yeah.
public agency reps. That's what you guys need for like K through.
Well, everybody is supposed to
Well, but I
have
need one
that.
takes notes and that really
Oh, I
knows
see.
what's going on. Like in preschool, I have one and she takes the best notes and we all get to talk. when you speech pass or the teacher of record, you run the meeting, you have
Yeah.
your admin come, and you guys are writing all of it. And you have to remember the notes. It's like that whole communication piece is super tricky. And we used to have like case conference coordinators
Uh-huh.
that would help coordinate us with those things. So
All right, I'm going to ask a really bad question, and I don't want you to feel guilty if you raise your hand on this.
We're at the video system.
He can mute this out. How many of you speech pathologists have had conferences where you are also serving as the public agency representative?
Not as not a TOR conference.
Not like I'm the TOR and the SLP, but I par some of my preschool.
Oh, okay, that I get,
Yeah.
but serving as both the TOR and the PAR, right? What I see with that is downplaying the importance of LI and SI, saying, well, you know, it's just one of those little disabilities. These others, they get a PAR. You're just going to have to do your
So
own thing.
If you do have a PAR, does your PAR take notes? Yes.
But my PAR is also covering, because with the emergency license, she's also covering a developmental preschool teacher who is
Right.
not licensed. So she's writing all the IEPs, doing all the transitions from first steps to preschool. So her plate is beyond, just like ours, beyond full. So.
In most cases, the PARs at meetings are your principal or your assistant principal, who generally are not taking notes and many times are saying, I got another meeting, I'll be back in 20 minutes, and they step out and come back in. Or who, I mean, they're preoccupied with a lot of other things. In the places where they are serving as PARs and they are really doing their job well and taking on that responsibility, it's wonderful. But they most of the time do not have a special ed background. So.
Does the PAR training we have, does it teach them how to take notes or no?
It does not. It goes over a lot of things. It goes over manifestations. But again, most of them are not the note takers. But we do talk about roles. And part of what is shared in the public agency representative training that we have is that your teachers, if they are trying to conduct the conference and have the conversation, it's hard to take notes and do that at the same time. And if you're taking notes on paper and having the conversation, that's hard enough. But trying to manipulate the IIEP program at the same time is crazy.
I'm the PAR for all of our initial meetings and the TOR not for speech, for the actual field. And I do the notes in Google and then at the end of the conference, so that I can have IIP open to whatever section they're on.
Uh-huh.
And not compromising the notes.
Yeah.
So, but we're in a unique situation because we're a standalone team and we PAR all of our conferences.
Right.
So we're not asking another building to participate. So.
That helps.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think the rest of us are saying we don't.
Yeah.
I don't
Nope.
know about the IEP side.
So this is the first year that we've done more extensive training with public agency representatives. And I mean, a lot of times when I've held online trainings, it's been like 75 people at a time. So I think there's an interest out there. But we know you all are here because you are knowledgeable to be here and you're looking to move forward. It's the people who aren't here that need to be, right? I mean, that's always the case when we're talking about training, unless you have been told, like, you know, sometimes we go into schools and the people who are attending the training had no control over whether or not they attended the training, and it's usually not that well received. But the people who are coming to the public agency representative training are there because they want to do things better. So it's the ones who aren't coming that either don't care about doing it the right way or think they're doing it the right way and maybe aren't. I mean, again, there are lots of people out there doing great things in all roles. But there are also people who are using very antiquated practices that aren't interested in changing those. Back to progress monitoring. Do we have anything else that you wanted to get input from the group on progress monitoring?
No, I don't think so. I guess we were just having further conversation about, like you talked about, you like consecutive sessions, correct? Like as a,
I do, but I think whatever is most appropriate for what you're trying to measure.
And there's a difference between consecutive sections and and consecutive data collection days. Because
Yes.
Consecutive data collection days
Mm-hmm.
can be over 4 weeks.
yeah,
Right?
and I
Is that-
usually take data every time, and then I just kind of pick what I, like, you know, like, I don't know. So then I wonder if I should be putting in more data collection dates for reporters. I don't know. Okay, just lots to think about.
I mean, it's
Depends how much time.
progress monitoring to me is best when you find something that you're naturally collecting and you're not having to like schedule. Yeah, you're taking existing data that seems to naturally tell you how a student's doing on a certain skill, and you're just formalizing it, right? Quantifying it somehow. Because we don't need any more assessment time than we already have.
I was gonna say, I do like the rubrics because I have saved like 25 in my IEP, so I do like that you can use them from previous, switch them based on the child and their needs, so you're not writing 5 different benchmarks every time. So I use rubrics a lot. Because
That's
of that.
impressive. I need to learn how to do
I
that.
love it.
Do that. Because when I think about it, it's overwhelming.
How to use the
How to
I can
do-
get to the goal bank. I can't save.
There's
new
more than
ones.
just the,
I
yeah, it's
know.
the
So she needs to stand up and tell us how to do
Well,
that.
do you,
Because when you're writing a goal, you're like, it's overwhelming, and it's 20 sections for one goal. And then when you're told, write a different goal for every
do you
other
want to
section.
explain that?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you open any student that you have a, active IEP, when you get to the rubric section, where at the very bottom where it's like manage your rubric, so you go there and that's where you can type in your rubric, right? So you're gonna title it, evaluation questions, whatever.
Right.
Put in whatever rubric, criteria,
Right.
stair steps you want, save it,
Okay.
and then it will always be in your bank. So then when you go to Johnny,
Yes.
every rubric is there, and I only want to look for the social communication. I
Johnny's
go and
similar
click
to-
it.
yeah.
So most of that transfers over, and then I can say, oh, well, Johnny doesn't have parallel play yet, so I'm going to
Sure.
tweak that one a little bit. But then it's all saved,
Nice.
and I don't have to go back and rewrite it.
So you can pull up a saved one and you can tweak it. Yeah, I don't know if you can just like export and send them.
No, but boy, I'm
Has a
preschool
Google
too.
shared team drive that has just like goals we like.
Yes.
Here's SDI that could go with that. Here's a rubric that could go with that. So
Nice.
it does take some time up front to save that.
Right.
It is very, I mean, once you put in the work, I feel like if you're gonna add a rubric, why not just save it to your,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But we
Totally.
clarify that we do tweak it first.
Oh,
Yes.
It's not gonna- But,
Just
but
like
I
your
use it for my
vowels and
Artic, like I
everything
just have my
else.
percentages that I drop down and I just save that rubric over there for my Artic goals. I wanna do that.
All right. Wrapping up. So I told you we would end a little bit early. So one thing that I would ask you to do is an evaluation. You've got a QR code in like right inside your folder. If you just use your camera, it'll take you right to the evaluation and you can complete that. It's just a couple of questions. It really only takes a minute to do that. You will all get, from signing in today, you will all get your PGP certificate emailed to you, so it'll come directly, as long as your email was in the system correctly. So if you don't get that within the next probably 3 or 4 days, because usually it'll happen tomorrow, but if you don't, then make sure and email me, because I will email all of you tomorrow and send you that annotated IEP. And if it's okay with you guys, and unless if somebody's concerned about it, I can leave you off of this and do it separately, but instead of doing a blind copy, I'm just going to send it to all of you, and that way if any of you has something you want to share with the group, templates or rubrics or something like that, then you can just send it out to the group. If you don't want to look at that stuff, just delete it as it comes, and we'll try not to overwhelm anyone. But all right, so I appreciate you guys coming.